Get off quickly, you fool. After getting my memory back, I promised myself I would leave my husband and in-laws who had put me through all of this. Where am I? My name is Meg, and I'm 28 years old. When I woke up, I found myself in a hospital bed. I was confused about how I ended up there. Just then, I heard footsteps, and a man rushed into the room. He came towards me with an angry expression, but I didn't know who he was. I don't know this person, I thought. Excuse me, but who are you? I asked. He looked at me and said, Meg, are you kidding me? If you're awake, you're fine. Leave the hospital right away. Being here is an overreaction. You're dragging me into this mess. His rude yelling surprised me. It was our first meeting, and he was shouting at me. A nurse and a security guard heard his raised voice and quickly came in to take him away. I was still shocked, unable to move. Then, my mother, Mary, came into the room, crying. Meg, you're awake. I'm so happy. We were so worried about you, she said. But I had no idea what she was talking about. My brother, Jake, was also crying, and my father, Ken, stood behind them, also teary-eyed. They told me I had collapsed in front of our house. I had hit my head and suffered a concussion with a big cut that needed stitches. I didn't remember any of it. Apparently, a neighbor had called an ambulance when I bled a lot from the injury. Mom, who was that angry man who came in earlier? I asked. A man? Angry? My family looked confused. After talking to the nurse and security guard, we found out that the man was supposed to be my husband. Wait, what? I'm married? I was shocked. I couldn't remember any of it. Are you serious, Meg? My brother looked at me with concern. Why did you collapse in front of the house? That guy was yelling at you to leave the hospital right away. Do you have amnesia? My mom asked, worried. Then she quickly called the nurse for help. The nurse explained everything, and I had to go through a lot of tests. It was too much for one day, and since the results wouldn't come right away, I had to wait. During that time, a lot of people came to visit. My coworkers brought snacks, flowers, fruit, and other gifts to help me feel better. Some even gave me personal gifts. Get off quickly, you fool. After getting my memory back, I promised myself I would leave my husband and in-laws who had put me through all of this. Where am I? My name is Meg, and I'm 28 years old. When I woke up, I found myself in a hospital bed. I was confused about how I ended up there. Just then, I heard footsteps, and a man rushed into the room. He came towards me with an angry expression, but I didn't know who he was. I don't know this person, I thought. Excuse me, but who are you? I asked. He looked at me and said, Meg, are you kidding me? If you're awake, you're fine. Leave the hospital right away. Being here is an overreaction. You're dragging me into this mess. His rude yelling surprised me. It was our first meeting, and he was shouting at me. A nurse and a security guard heard his raised voice and quickly came in to take him away. I was still shocked, unable to move. Then, my mother, Mary, came into the room, crying. Meg, you're awake. I'm so happy. We were so worried about you, she said. But I had no idea what she was talking about. My brother, Jake, was also crying, and my father, Ken, stood behind them, also teary-eyed. They told me I had collapsed in front of our house. I had hit my head and suffered a concussion with a big cut that needed stitches. I didn't remember any of it. Apparently, a neighbor had called an ambulance when I bled a lot from the injury. Mom, who was that angry man who came in earlier? I asked. A man? Angry? My family looked confused. After talking to the nurse and security guard, we found out that the man was supposed to be my husband. Wait, what? I'm married? I was shocked. I couldn't remember any of it. Are you serious, Meg? My brother looked at me with concern. Why did you collapse in front of the house? That guy was yelling at you to leave the hospital right away. Do you have amnesia? My mom asked, worried. Then she quickly called the nurse for help. The nurse explained everything, and I had to go through a lot of tests. It was too much for one day, and since the results wouldn't come right away, I had to wait. During that time, a lot of people came to visit. My coworkers brought snacks, flowers, fruit, and other gifts to help me feel better. Some even gave me personal gifts. Meg, today we made your favorite fried chicken. Eat as much as you like. Your dad bought a cake, too. Let's all eat it together later. My mother made delicious meals for me every day, and my father and brother took great care of me. Thanks to my mom's cooking, my body started getting better day by day. My workplace was understanding, and they told me to take time off to rest and come back to work when I was fully recovered. Living at my parents' house helped me heal, not just from my injuries, but also from the fatigue I had built up. My hair and skin, which had been in bad shape when I first went to the hospital, became healthy again. I could see how much stress I had been under during my married life. But suddenly, I felt anxious. Does being married mean I have to go back to that house? I said this out loud, and my mother quickly responded, "Don't worry, no one is going to force you to go back to a house that treated you this badly. You should divorce him and cut ties as soon as possible." After talking it over with my family, we decided to get a lawyer. The lawyer was a longtime family friend who knew me since I was a child, and after hearing what had happened, he was angry and agreed to help. Thanks to the lawyer's help, the divorce process started smoothly. Meanwhile, at Kevin's house, he and his parents were angry. "When is she coming back? The housework and the store can't run smoothly without her. We need her back as soon as possible." Kevin said, "She's already been discharged from the hospital, right? Why isn't she coming back here? Instead of resting, she should be having a child." Kevin's father also complained, "She's a spoiled wife. When she comes back, we need to set her straight." They even called my parents' house every day. "Is Meg there? Why isn't she coming back? She's feeling better, right? We have a business, so she should come back to work soon." My brother told me what they had said. My family all agreed that I didn't need to return, but I wanted to go get my belongings. I talked to the lawyer, and my father decided to come with me. From that day on, Kevin's family was in trouble. As soon as I entered the house, they started blaming me. "How long are you going to stay at your parents' house? What have you been doing? You haven't even answered the phone. You're such an irresponsible wife. Hurry up and get back to work. There's a lot of housework and work waiting for you." But as Kevin and his family yelled at me, my father and the lawyer entered the room. They were surprised to see them and stopped yelling. "Why didn't you come back alone? Why did you bring a lawyer? What does he have to do with this?" they asked, but then they started scolding me again. The lawyer tried to calm them down and led them to the living room. My father stayed with them while I went upstairs to pack my things. As I packed, I remembered I had left something important here, a diary where I had written down the emotional abuse from Kevin and his family, along with the dates. The lawyer said it was very important evidence. I also had another piece of evidence I had hidden from them. As I was packing, I heard a loud bang on the desk downstairs. Kevin's family was yelling again. "Who agreed to the divorce? Don't make decisions on your own." My body tensed up at the sound, and I crouched down, worried. It seemed like my father and the lawyer were discussing the divorce, and things were about to get serious. I quickly grabbed my packed things and rushed downstairs. Just then, Kevin came out and asked, "What's with the luggage? Aren't you coming back? Are you the one asking for a divorce? Explain yourself." As Kevin tried to grab me, the lawyer stepped in and stopped him. "Violence is not acceptable," the lawyer said. Kevin tried to argue, but the doorbell rang. My mother-in-law answered the intercom. "We are the police. Is Kevin Davis home?" the police asked. My mother-in-law's voice shook as she hurried to open the door. One of the officers said, "Kevin Davis, you are under arrest for suspicion of assault. Please come with us." Kevin was shocked. "Why me?" he asked. He seemed confused, but the police explained that after I filed a complaint about the incident, it became a criminal case. The security camera footage confirmed my story, leaving him with no excuse. At first, Kevin tried to remain calm, saying, "I'm not wrong. It's her fault for being clumsy. I only pushed her a little." But as he shouted louder, neighbors began gathering outside. My mother-in-law cried out, "Kevin, why?" And my father-in-law just stood there, stunned, ignoring them. My father, the lawyer, and I left the house. Afterward, we sent a formal letter to my in-laws and Kevin, demanding a divorce. I included the details of the incident and the ongoing emotional abuse, all of which I had documented in my diary. That day, when Kevin slammed his fist on the table, everything clicked into place. All the memories of the emotional abuse came flooding back. I had also recorded many instances of verbal abuse on my smartphone. There were nearly 100 recordings over the past year. Kevin and my in-laws would yell at me over the smallest things, like dinner being late or the bath not being ready. They called me a failure, lazy, and slow. Listening to these recordings made me feel small and worthless, but now, with the evidence I had, my diary and voice recordings, I knew I had what I needed for the divorce. I also sent a piece of evidence to my in-laws, Kevin's medical test results. They always blamed me for not having children, But it turned out that Kevin had a condition called azoospermia, which caused infertility. I had kept quiet about it before, but now, I didn't care. In court, Kevin still blamed me, shouting, "It's her fault, I did nothing wrong." His behavior showed no remorse, and the judge sentenced him to prison without probation. I also sued Kevin for emotional and psychological abuse. I planned to get compensation and sever all ties with him completely. There was no love left for him now, and I felt relieved knowing I wouldn't have to see him while he was in prison. As for my in-laws, I used the evidence of the emotional abuse to negotiate a settlement. At first, they argued, "Why should we pay? We were teaching her how to be a proper wife. She should be grateful," but in the end, I received compensation from them as well. After my in-laws found out that there was solid evidence against them, they likely realized that the scandal would damage their business, so they paid me more compensation than what was typical in such cases. However, their fears quickly became a reality. Kevin's arrest led to rumors spreading fast. People talked about how Kevin, the son of the local store owners, had pushed his wife out of the car and seriously injured her. The gossip was hard to avoid, especially since Kevin's parents had always mistreated me. Even though I worked outside the home, they expected me to work for free at their store. These rumors severely hurt their business. Over time, customers stopped coming, and the store closed just 6 months after Kevin's arrest. To make things worse, Kevin's parents had taken out loans using their land as collateral, so they ended up losing both their land and their savings. Eventually, they filed for bankruptcy. Now, they live modestly in a small, old apartment and rely on welfare. I can't help but wonder if the three of them will continue to live together once Kevin is released, but honestly, that's none of my concern anymore. A few years after Kevin's arrest, and his eventual release, my life has taken a positive turn. Ronald, my current boyfriend and boss, has been a great support. He listens to my troubles, especially when my ex-husband harasses me. Ronald even began giving me rides to and from work. One day, my ex-husband suddenly approached me, asking if we could live together again. "I've changed," he said, "we can make it work." Ronald, who had been standing nearby, immediately stepped in. "Stop bothering her," he said firmly. My ex tried to argue, saying, "This has nothing to do with you, it's between me and Meg, stay out of it." But Ronald, not backing down, responded, "Meg is important to me, you need to give up on her already. If I see you bothering her again, I'll call the police." Since then, I haven't seen my ex. Ronald is physically strong, with a tough appearance, which was probably a good deterrent against my ex, who wasn't very large. But Ronald has a soft side too. He loves sweets, which is a cute contrast to his tough exterior. He's a wonderful person who always respects my opinions, and I'm so grateful to have him in my life. My name is Bella, and life has a way of teaching you who's really in control. Not long ago, I would have eagerly told anyone about my marriage to Willie, brimming with the joy of a newlywed. I truly believed that leaving my promising career at Ventic Tech to focus on our marriage was the right decision. Love, after all, is supposed to be worth more than money, isn't it? Ventic Tech had its quirks, but it also had strict policies, especially about workplace relationships. Once Willie and I tied the knot, we were thrust into an awkward spotlight. Our boss, Gary, wasted no time delivering an ultimatum, with all the theatrics of a reality show host. That evening, our conversation felt like a scene from a high-stakes drama. Blinded by love, I caved. The next day, I handed in my resignation and walked away from a career I had worked so hard to build. Fast forward to today, and here I am, cleaning up spilled cereal because Willie, ever the soon-to-be promoted, can't manage to aim for his bowl. "Didn't your mother teach you better?" I shout, half joking, toward the living room. My words disappear into the walls, his defensive reply arriving just as invisibly. I let it go. It's not worth another argument. Once, we teased each other with ease. Now, every conversation feels like navigating a minefield. Hours later, Willie is glued to the couch, the TV casting a dull glow over his indifferent face. I glance at the untouched dinner table, the remnants of what we once had haunting the silence. "Are we going to talk? Or is that couch your new lifelong commitment?" I ask, forcing the words out. "About what?" His reply is sharp and dismissive, without even a glance in my direction. I count to 12, clinging to patience. "About us, about where this mess is heading." My voice cracks slightly. He shrugs. That shrug, heavier than any shout, fills the room with a suffocating silence. The TV chatters on, oblivious to the collapse happening within its reach. That's when it hits me. Our marriage, once so sturdy, now feels like a house of cards collapsing under its own weight. The bond we'd built is crumbling, piece by piece, and neither of us seems to know how to stop it. Life, with its cruel irony, has turned our plans and dreams into fragile remnants of what once was. I linger, watching him. The man on the couch feels like a stranger, a distant passenger I might pass on the street. The shift from warmth to indifference was subtle but devastating, like the first bite of frost signaling the end of summer. Later that evening, I prepare his favorite meal, steak, seasoned and cooked just the way he likes, or so I thought. As he enters the kitchen, his heavy footsteps foreshadow his sour mood. He scans the table like a predator sizing up its prey. He picks up a piece of steak with his hands, ignoring the utensils beside him. Is this the best you can do now? His tone is gritty, like sandpaper. It's slightly cooler than usual, I reply cautiously, referring to the temperature. Not what? He snaps, his glare cutting into me. I bite my tongue, holding back the flood of thoughts. Speaking up would only make things worse. When I say I want my steak hot, he continues, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. I expect to feel the life leaving it as I cut in. This, he jabs the steak with his fork, is already dead and gone. His words, devoid of any shouting, carry a venom so sharp it leaves me hollow. He pushes the plate away and meets my gaze for a fleeting moment, his eyes filled with a mixture of contempt and resignation. Forget it, he mutters, turning away, grabbing his keys. He delivers a final blow. Fix your mistakes, Bella, or next time, it won't just be dinner getting tossed out. The door slams shut behind him, the echo punctuating the end of what little joy remained in our relationship. I stand there, staring at the uneaten meal, wondering how we reached this point, and if there's any way back. I stood motionless, staring at the door Willie had slammed shut behind him. The sound still echoed in the silence of the apartment, reverberating like a final punctuation to an unspoken truth. I exhaled slowly, glancing down at the abandoned steak on the table. Its cold, lifeless state mirrored my own feelings, discarded and forlorn. Each step toward the trash can felt heavier than the last, a somber reminder of what I was throwing away, my effort, my care, and the fragile hope that things could still change. To the outside world, we were the picture of a perfect couple, admired by friends, praised by his parents, but behind closed doors, the reality was far from ideal. Willie's demands had become relentless, chipping away at my self-esteem with every passing day. My life revolved around seeking his approval, which had grown as rare as sunlight in a storm. Tonight was no different. The dinner table became a stage for his critiques. "What's this?" he asked flatly, pointing at the plate of steamed broccoli and grilled chicken I had set before him. "Dinner," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Broccoli again? Do you know how to make anything else?" His words dripped with disdain as he pushed the plate away like it was contaminated. Suppressing a retort, I offered, "I can make something else." His sneer was immediate. That would be a first. The sting of his words fueled a simmering anger within me, but I turned back to the kitchen. Before I could start anew, his sharp voice cut through the air. "Where are you going?" "To cook," I answered, barely keeping the edge out of my tone. He stood abruptly, the screech of his chair grating against the floor. "Sit down. Let's not pretend you have other plans. Your world revolves around me, remember?" His words were a leash, yanking me back into the reality I'd been too afraid to confront. "Yeah," I murmured, defeated, returning to the table. Later that night, as silence filled the apartment, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The weight of unsaid words and unmet dreams pressed down on me. This wasn't a partnership, it was a prison, built on dependence, fear, and a facade of perfection. But life has a way of intervening in unexpected ways. One cold, ordinary day, I slipped on a patch of ice while carrying groceries. Pain shot through my leg, sharp and unforgiving. A few bystanders rushed to help, their concern a stark contrast to the indifference I had grown accustomed to. At the hospital, a doctor confirmed what I already suspected: my leg was broken. "It's broken," he said matter-of-factly, as if announcing the weather. The real pain wasn't from the injury but from the dread of telling Willie. I sent him a text, "Broke my leg." At the hospital, his response never came. That night in the hospital was cold and lonely. The nurses were efficient but distant, and the stale coffee did little to warm me. By morning, I was discharged with crutches, a cast as stark as the snow outside, and a pile of instructions. Willie was waiting when I got home, his face stormy, no concern, no questions about how I was feeling. His first words were, "Where's dinner?" standing there on crutches, my leg immobilized. Something inside me snapped. "What do you think happened? I went dancing? Look at my leg," I yelled, my voice cracking under the weight of all I'd held back. He barely flinched. His only response was a dismissive wave of his hand as he turned away, muttering about how I should have been more careful. In that moment, the full extent of his selfishness and neglect hit me like a tidal wave. The life I had tried so hard to salvage wasn't just broken, it was unsalvageable. Willie's tirade made his feelings painfully clear. My broken leg was, in his eyes, an inconvenience I had inflicted on him. "You always have excuses," he spat bitterly. "You can't even do the one thing you're supposed to, can you?" I stared at him, astounded. After a harrowing night in the hospital, his only concern was dinner. The sheer indifference stung more than my injury. The air between us felt as cold as the ice I'd slipped on. A chilling confirmation that this was more than a physical wound, it was a fracture in our relationship, one that had been forming for years. Despite my trembling hands and aching body, I limped to the kitchen and began preparing dinner. Each step felt like an eternity, a cruel mockery of my efforts to maintain normalcy. Near the trash bin, overflowing from a day of neglect, I hesitated. I knew Willie wouldn't let it go. "What's this?" he barked, his sharp tone cutting through the tension. "You're home all day and can't even handle the trash?" He stormed over, fury radiating off him, and with a swift kick, he sent the contents sprawling across the floor. "Clean it up," he commanded. My hand shook as I knelt down, not from the physical pain, but from a deeper, more profound hurt. That night, sleep eluded me as his harsh words echoed in my head, mingling with the hot sting of tears. By morning, nothing had changed except my resolve. The kitchen table was now adorned with divorce papers. As the coffee dripped in the background, Willie stumbled in, bleary-eyed and reeking of alcohol. "Morning," he growled, his voice rough. "What's for breakfast?" Without a word, I pushed the papers toward him. He glanced down, his lips curling into a mocking smile. "You serious?" he scoffed. "As a heart attack," I replied, my heart pounding but my voice steady. He laughed, loud and dismissive. "You ain't got the guts." "I already filed," I countered, meeting his sneer with a steady gaze. "Just need your signature." He leaned in close, his voice low and venomous. "You think you can survive without me? You're a broken bird, can't even take out the trash." "I'm done talking, Willie," I said firmly. "Sign the papers, or I'll have the authorities force you to." His face twisted with rage, but he grabbed the pen and scrawled his name, each stroke heavy and deliberate, tossing the pen down like it burned him. He sneered. "Good luck, darling, you'll be crawling back before the month's up." But I wouldn't, I couldn't. This was my line in the sand. The moment I refused to accept any more of his cruelty. Despite everything, I smiled. Those signed papers felt like my first step, on crutches, maybe, but toward a better life. "Crawling's not my style," I murmured. The next morning, an eerie silence greeted me. Over coffee, Willie casually mentioned the property split. "Got a lawyer," he said, his tone as commanding as ever. "You coming with me?" Still healing, with my choices seeming limited, I nodded. Willie helped me into the car, his actions oddly gentle as he propped up my cast. Everything felt strangely normal as we drove, the city skyline shrinking behind us like a distant memory. Suddenly, he pulled over to the side of the highway. "The tire might need air," he mumbled, stepping out to inspect it. Leaning heavily on the car, I followed, unsure of his intentions. He pretended to fuss with the tires, his movements calculated. Then, without warning, he jumped back into the driver's seat. Before I could react, he hit the gas and sped off, leaving me stranded. I stood there, stunned, watching his car vanish down the highway, the sound of the engine fading into silence. I gripped my crutches tightly, disbelieving but strangely resolute. Alone on that desolate stretch of road, I realized this wasn't the end, it was the beginning of my freedom. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and called him in desperation. Willie's voice came through cold and smug. "Come back," I yelled, my voice cracking with frustration and fear. He just laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "This is what you get for trying to divorce me," he sneered before hanging up. The line went dead, and I stood there, the taillights of his car fading into the distance, alone on the side of a desolate road. The winter chill gnawed at me, a cruel echo of my abandonment. Cars sped past, their drivers oblivious to my plight, their indifference stinging as much as the icy wind. Minutes turned into an eternity until finally, a rattling Jeep truck pulled up beside me. To my shock, It was Gary, my former boss. His gruff, familiar voice broke through my haze. "You look like hell, Bella," he said, his concern cutting through the cold. "Why didn't you call someone?" I shrugged, the weight of the day pressing down on me. "Thought I could handle it," I murmured, ashamed of how wrong I'd been. Gary's expression darkened. "He left you here, with a broken leg? That man's a coward," he growled, helping me into the warmth of his Jeep. The drive to Ventic Tech was quiet but heavy with unspoken understanding. Gary guided me into his office, where he handed me a steaming mug of coffee. The warmth seeped into my frozen hands, thawing both my body and my spirits. "Thanks," I said softly, taking a sip. Gary paced, his agitation evident. "I can't believe that bastard," he muttered, more to himself than to me. Then, turning to face me, he asked, "What are you going to do now, Bella?" "I don't know," I admitted, the uncertainty of my future looming large. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "We need you back here. The team hasn't been the same since you left." A flicker of hope sparked in my chest. "You serious?" "As a heart attack," he replied. "You're the best we ever had. I should have fought harder to keep you." I glanced down at my cast. "Might be tricky with this." Gary waved off my concern. "We'll manage. I'll wait until you're ready. No excuses. No saying no." I smiled faintly, touched by his belief in me. "I'll think about it," I said, though deep down, I'd already decided. The tension in the office was palpable as Willie stormed in the next morning. His boots thudded across the floor with less certainty than usual. When he saw me standing beside Gary, his face paled before quickly hardening into a sneer. "What's this about?" he barked, his voice edged with defiance. Gary gestured to a chair. "Sit," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. Willie remained standing, crossing his arms in a show of bravado. "Willie," Gary began, his gaze cold and cutting, "I've seen some poor decisions in my time, but what you've done takes the cake." Willie's eyes darted to me, his expression a mix of anger and fear. "What lies has she been feeding you?" "No lies needed," I replied calmly, "just the truth, recorded loud and clear." Gary slid a recording device across the desk. "Care to listen to your greatest hits?" Willie's face went ashen. "You can't fire me over this," he sputtered. "Oh, I can, and I am," Gary shot back, his voice like steel. Willie's desperation mounted. "I'll sue." "Go ahead," I said, my voice cold, "but you'll lose. I've got all the evidence I need, and you've got nothing but empty threats." Gary stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor like a declaration of war. "Get out, Willie, you're done here." Willie stormed out, defeated, and the weight of his departure lifted from my shoulders. In court, the judge's gavel fell decisively. "This court grants the separation and orders compensation to be paid," the judge declared. It felt like the first breath of spring, chilly but full of promise. Back at work, I settled into a rhythm, every keystroke a step toward rebuilding my life. My colleagues' greetings were warm, their support unwavering. "Feels weird, huh?" Harold said one morning, leaning against my desk. I smiled. "Weird doesn't cover it. Feels like I've come back from the dead." He chuckled. "Zombie Bella, back for revenge?" "Something like that," I said, grinning, "but this time, I'm not taking crap from anyone." "That's the spirit," Harold said, his nod full of encouragement. This wasn't just a fresh start, it was a reclaimed life, and I was ready to live it on my terms.
I'm all set for life marrying into wealth. While you continue to struggle in your modest existence, Bob jeered with a smirk, throwing condescending words my way. His shrill voice pierced the air, disrupting my relaxing break in the hotel lobby. I wondered where he had met his new wife, a president's daughter, no less. Julie, the daughter of Johnson Enterprises. Bob, with his middle-aged man's laugh, seemed oddly proud. But the mention of Johnson Enterprises caught my attention. It sounded familiar. But which company was it? Ah, yes. I recalled the details about Johnson Enterprises, and a proud smile spread across Bob's face. Meanwhile, I struggled to suppress a laugh bubbling up inside me. My name is Amy. I'm 35 and living with my husband, Bob. I work in my family's real estate business, handling mostly administrative tasks. My father, the president, manages the key business strategies. Being an only child, I'm expected to eventually take over the company. With older executives at the helm, I feel the pressure of one day becoming the president. However, I've been careful not to discuss much about our family business with Bob, who only finished high school and works in a moving company. I don't want to bring work matters home, and Bob, feeling somewhat inferior, avoids the topic. Of course, moving is a tough job requiring physical strength and skill, a job for professionals. I don't mind that he only has a high school diploma, but I understand his feelings, so I avoid mentioning my prestigious university degree or my future role as president in our daily conversations. Bob and I met through a friend's introduction in college. My friend had hired Bob's moving company, and he was in charge of her move. Initially interested in my friend, Bob was turned down, but they got along, so she introduced him to me. Our unusual meeting turned out well, as Bob's carefree nature was a good match for my meticulous personality. After several dates, we became a couple in my late 20s, and at the right age for marriage, our relationship quickly led to marriage within a year. Thus began my life as Bob's wife. Our married life started without any issues. Bob's parents were incredibly kind, always welcoming me with smiles during our visits. Considering the common mother-in-law issues among my friends, I felt lucky to have such a harmonious relationship with my in-laws. However, Bob's demanding job often kept him out until late, physically taxing and leaving him exhausted. Despite his fatigue, he never neglected our marital life. While appreciative, I often thought he didn't need to try so hard. Thanks for always waiting up for me. Bob would thank me for simply preparing dinner after his long workdays. I felt blessed to have such a wonderful husband. But our peaceful days began to waver a year into our marriage. Hey, why can't we have kids? One night as we got into bed, Bob casually brought up the subject, his tone slightly irritated. It took me by surprise. I had thought about having children too, and although we weren't actively trying, given our regular marital life, I believed it would happen in time. It's just bad timing. We've only been married a year, so it's not something to worry about yet. I reassured him. I definitely wanted children, but knew that rushing wouldn't help. To reassure Bob, I deliberately adopted a relaxed tone and said, "It's still okay, huh? Don't you know for couples not using contraception, there's about an 80% chance of conceiving within a year?" Bob, more forceful than usual, even quoted percentages, 80% within a year. Not well versed in pregnancy statistics, that number seemed incredibly high to me. Really? If you're that eager for kids, should we get tested together? I thought it best to identify and address any clear issues. I proposed that both of us undergo fertility tests, but Bob's response caught me off guard. What are you talking about? Are you implying it's my fault? Infertility issues are usually the woman's fault. There's no point in me getting tested. Bob's contemptuous tone, a first for him, stunned me. I hadn't accused him of being the cause. I simply suggested testing since we didn't know where the issue lay yet. However, Bob jumped to the conclusion that I was blaming him and added, "It's definitely the woman's fault," as if to say I was the problem. I wanted to say more, but I was shaking, barely able to reply. Of course, I managed to say, "So just you get tested. I'm too busy with work. I have a job too. You're just a placeholder office lady, right? Just coasting along in a company thanks to your dad's connections." I never just coast at my company. Sure, I do a lot of administrative work now, but I'm also learning management skills from my father for when I take over the company. I'm constantly trying to prove myself, and it's tough dealing with the higher-ups. Bob just doesn't understand my struggles. That night, it seemed pointless to argue with him. Any word I said was met with sharp retorts, and we went to sleep back to back in a heavy atmosphere. From that day on, Bob's attitude towards me changed completely. "I'm home." "What? Dinner's not ready yet? What time do you think it is? Can't have kids. Can't do housework. What a useless wife." One evening, after a late talk with my father about the future, I came home to find Bob berating me for not having dinner ready. "I'm sorry, I just got home 10 minutes ago. I'll start cooking now." "Just wait a little, please," I hurriedly explained. Bob muttered. That's typical of a small company's boss's daughter. He didn't know, but my father's real estate company was not small at all, with hundreds of employees. But I knew arguing this point was meaningless. "I'll cook right away, have a drink, and wait." Bob loved his alcohol. It seemed to calm him down. Relying on alcohol to maintain our relationship felt sad. I hated being berated by him, but if alcohol could soothe him even a bit, then it was worth it. The next morning, Bob's mood hadn't improved. "Make sure dinner's ready when I get home," he spat as he left. I sighed, thinking about my plans for the day. I had taken the day off to visit the gynecologist for fertility testing, as previously mentioned by Bob. Although I was the one who initially suggested the testing, the fact that only I was undergoing it while Bob refused was something I found hard to accept. But complaining wouldn't change anything. If the issue was with me, I needed to start infertility treatment promptly. Bob had been wanting kids, and I too hoped for a child soon. I knew fertility rates differ between the 20s and 30s, so sooner was better for treatment. The clinic was busier than expected, and I was called in for examination an hour after registration. After undergoing a physical examination and blood tests, I was told that the results would be available during my next visit. It would be a shock if the issue was with me, but I was prepared for any necessary steps, no matter the outcome. I resolved not to lose heart. "Bob, I went for the fertility test today." When Bob came home from work, I informed him about the test. "Huh, figures. If the problem's with you, testing's the right thing to do. Let me know the results as soon as you get them," he said. Bob's belief that I was the cause of our infertility frustrated me. The fertility testing required much time and effort, and a bit of understanding from him would have been welcome. 5 years passed, and I turned 35. Though we continued our efforts to conceive, we remained childless, and Bob seemed to have given up on having a child with me. His late nights increased, and sometimes he didn't come home at all. When asked, he said he was out drinking with colleagues, then singing karaoke till morning. His behavior was more akin to a college student and deeply exasperated me. My work had become busier, and the thought of starting a family was pushed aside. But Bob's recent actions were too much. His lack of concern for our home life was clear. One day, after Bob went out on his day off, I observed that he had left his smartphone in the living room, forgetting to take it with him. With that realization, I picked up Bob's phone, intending to take it to his room. It was at that moment that his phone rang, an incoming call from a certain Julie, as indicated by the caller ID. Assuming it was a work contact, I answered to inform them that Bob had forgotten his phone at home. "Hey, Bob, you're late. I've been waiting for 30 minutes. Where are you? If you don't hurry, we'll miss the park opening." The flirty voice on the phone made me catch my breath. "Can you hear me? Hurry up, okay? We haven't had a date in so long." The mention of a date shook me, and I quickly ended the call. My heart wouldn't stop racing. Who was this woman? She mentioned a date, so she likely wasn't a colleague. He's cheating on me. Holding undeniable proof of Bob's infidelity, I clenched his phone tightly. Julie had said it was a long-awaited date, indicating a long-term affair. I trembled with indescribable anger. While I was struggling with infertility, Bob was carelessly cheating on me. His recent distance now made sense. He no longer needed me. Unforgivable. Determined to make Bob pay, I started collecting evidence of his infidelity. It wasn't hard to gather proof. First, I easily unlocked his smartphone using his birth date. The call history was filled with Julie's name. When I opened the messaging app, I found numerous messages between Bob and Julie, filled with embarrassingly affectionate words that made me feel nauseated. I took photos of these pieces of evidence with my phone. After placing Bob's phone back in his room, I spent the day as if nothing had happened. After a month of a strange marriage, my father, the company president, summoned me to his office. "I have something important to discuss with you," he said gravely. Shocked by his words, I couldn't believe what I heard. Is that true? I asked. Yes, so I'm counting on you. Disturbed, I returned to my office, barely concentrating on work. That evening, Bob suggested we separate. Having found evidence of his affair, I had been contemplating when to bring up divorce, but him initiating it saved me the hassle. Yes, let's divorce. Really? Because I had readily accepted the divorce, Bob seemed surprised. Perhaps he was happy about being able to be with his mistress, a woman named Julie. His face was filled with an unmistakable joy that I found irritating. Despite my irritation with Bob's expression, I signed the divorce papers he offered. I can file these tomorrow. I'll be leaving this house. Okay. Are you sure about the mortgage? I anticipated he would want me to leave, so I casually asked. Oh yes, I'm fine. Bob's job was demanding but not high-paying. I doubted he could handle the mortgage alone. But since he initiated the divorce and was the one cheating, I felt no obligation to help. I packed and left the house 3 days later, moving back to my parents' house nearby. My parents initially seemed concerned when I told them about my divorce. But when I explained that Bob had cheated on me, they became furious. They repeatedly reassured me that it was the right decision to part ways with such a man. I threw myself into work, trying to forget about Bob. Before I realized it, a year had flown by. I was so engrossed in my work that I lost sight of everything else. It was astonishing. One day, while relaxing in the living room, my dad approached me. Why don't you take a break and go on a trip? It's going to get busy starting next month. Guess he thought I'd been working too hard and needed a distraction. Indeed, I have been overwhelmed with various things lately and felt mentally exhausted. Thinking a little trip wouldn't hurt, I took up Dad's suggestion and decided to travel to the Northeast. It was my first solo trip, and I was both nervous and excited. The air in the Northeast was crisp and seemed to cleanse my weary soul. Interacting with the locals who helped me navigate and chatting with the owner of a bar, I found everyone to be incredibly kind, which gradually healed my spirit. I had booked a hotel in Seattle, the most famous and largest around here, thinking, why not enjoy the trip to the fullest? After checking in, I relaxed in the lobby with a welcome drink. The fatigue from the journey seemed to melt away, feeling utterly comfortable. Jokingly considering moving to Seattle, a familiar voice called out, "Ha! Hey, what are you doing here?" I spun around, startled by the unmistakable voice of my ex-husband, Bob, entering the lobby with 2 large suitcases and a young woman in her early 20s. She had flawless skin, bold makeup, and striking red nails, despite the chilly Northeast weather. Wearing a short skirt with bare legs, I stared at Bob and the woman in disbelief, unable to contain my curiosity. "Why are you here, and who is she?" I blurted out, even though I wasn't sure if I wanted to know. "Oh, let me introduce you. This is Julie, my new wife. We're on our honeymoon. Guess what? She's a wealthy businessman's daughter," Bob exclaimed, appearing genuinely happy and volunteering information I hadn't asked for. However, the name Julie struck a chord, the same name as the person on the phone. Disgusted that he was with such a young girl, I felt a surge of discomfort. "You're on a solo trip here. That's pathetic," Bob sneered, despite being the one who cheated and initiated our divorce. Julie, too, was looking at me with narrowed eyes, her tone carrying amusement. "Hey, Bob, is this your ex-wife? She looks old. Hurry up with the check-in." Irritated by her catty tone, I glared at Julie. Bob nonchalantly wrapped an arm around her waist, responding, "Yeah, I'm set for life marrying into money. You can keep struggling in your poor life." Bob's high-pitched voice echoed through the hotel lobby, disrupting the elegant atmosphere I was enjoying and leaving me feeling upset. His mention of marrying a businessman's daughter made me wonder where he had met someone like that. "Yeah, Julie is the daughter of Johnson Enterprises," Bob proudly stated, his middle-aged laugh seeming childishly proud to me. I pondered, feeling that Johnson Enterprises sounded familiar. After a moment, I recalled it. "Oh right, that company." Bob's face lit up with pride. "Impressive, huh?" he exclaimed. However, I was secretly holding back laughter inside. "Come on, you know this company. Her family's loaded, and they even paid off the mortgage on that house quickly. Thanks for divorcing me so easily, Amy. His tone was dripping with sarcasm, but it didn't bother me at all. Yeah, I know them. They're in the biggest building downtown, right? I've seen it and even been there, I replied calmly. Oh, you've been there? Bob seemed surprised. It's quick then. Her family owns a huge company, so they're loaded. Breaking up with you was the right choice. Bob smirked nastily, but I simply nodded, still calm. That building, it's part of our real estate holdings, I mentioned casually, as if I just remembered. Bob and Julie both asked in unison, What do you mean by our real estate? That building is rented by my father for his most prestigious office. I don't know if your company is involved in real estate, but it's not a shabby building, I explained calmly. Both seemed skeptical of my words. I hesitated for a moment, but there was no turning back now. Telling Bob about my company wasn't my concern anymore. Yes, I know how grand it is. I was there when my father bought that building. It was about $200 million, I think. But recently, Dad was complaining about a tenant not paying their rent. Turns out it was your company. In fact, my father is a real estate magnate with assets worth $3.2 billion. The building Johnson Enterprises is in is one of them. The tenants of the building change regularly, but currently it's Johnson Enterprises. For the past few months, they hadn't paid their rent, and that's what was troubling my father. Rent not paid. Julie looked shocked, but then she burst out laughing. That can't be true. Our company's doing great. We can surely pay the rent. I'm not falling for such a lame lie to drive a wedge between Bob and me. Her shrill voice echoed in my ears. I let out a deep sigh. It seemed like a reasonable conversation with this woman was impossible. Pulling out my smartphone right there, I decided to call my dad. Dad, I'm here with the daughter of Johnson Enterprises. Can you send me a photo of the reminder notice for the rent? I quickly relayed my request, and Dad sent a photo of the rent reminder notice for Johnson Enterprises. Showing it to Bob and Julie, I doubted they could suspect it was fake, given the speed. See, you can tell, right? 3 months of unpaid rent. If you don't pay soon, we might have to sue. What are you going to do? At the mention of a lawsuit, Bob and Julie's faces turned pale. Come to think of it, Dad has been really on edge lately, yelling about sales and firing a lot of employees. Julie mumbled, sounding unsure. Seeing her, Bob shouted in despair, Lies. You're just trying to trick us and tear Julie and me apart, aren't you? You're still that kind of person, trying to get back at me for remarrying. Your tactics are dirty. Startled by Bob's loud voice, I took a step back, hearing Bob's accusations of dirty tactics. Memories of all the heartless words he had hurled at me during our marriage flooded back. Determined to confront Bob, who was now gloating about marrying Julie, a wealthy businessman's daughter, I prepared myself to tell him the truth. What are you even saying? Do you really think I still have feelings for you? How foolish. I've long been fed up with a man like you. In fact, I've been feeling sorry for Julie, who got caught up with you. Did you marry her just for her money? You married me for shallow reasons too, like wanting to get married quickly or wanting kids. And who was it that left me when he found out we couldn't have kids? Who insulted me, calling me useless for being infertile? You're to blame for all of it, yet you think I still like you. You must be out of your mind. I unleashed my pent-up frustrations on Bob, feeling a wave of relief. Bob, on the other hand, seemed infuriated, trembling with anger. You're just an arrogant old hag. You probably can't even get married or have kids anymore. Julie and I were planning to have fun making a baby after this trip, and now you're accusing Johnson Enterprises of not paying rent. Panicked upon realizing the poor performance of Johnson Enterprises, Bob was desperate to blame all his misfortunes on me, deciding to deliver the final blow. I calmly said, "Oh, I didn't mention it, but I'm 4 months pregnant. I'm in the stable phase of my pregnancy, so Dad suggested I take this trip to relax. Of course, I have my doctor's permission." That's right. After divorcing Bob, I had found a new love, my boss at work and a subordinate of my father. He supported me mentally when I was struggling, encouraged me at work, and fully supported me. I found out I was pregnant with his child just 3 months ago. Knowing about the baby, I immediately married him. It was a quick marriage, but the company celebrated it grandly. My pregnancy was going smoothly, and encouraged by my father and husband, I embarked on this trip. And just before breaking up with Bob, my father had told me he was retiring as CEO next month. He decided to retire after being diagnosed with diabetes and thinking it was time to step down. Therefore, I would inherit my father's assets. This made it easier for me to accept the divorce from Bob. Even without Bob, I knew I could live a full life. The word pregnant slipped effortlessly from my lips, leaving Bob shouting, "What? You're pregnant? So, were you using birth control when we were married? What's going on?" Bob stomped his feet in complete confusion. "Birth control? I never did that. Remember, I told you I had infertility tests at the clinic, and they found no issues. So the problem was with you. Too bad." As I bluntly told this to Bob, his face twisted visibly. The problem was with me? Does that mean Julie and I can't have kids? Why did I divorce you and marry Julie? Bob muttered to himself, shoulders slumped in defeat. "What do you mean? Why?" I felt betrayed, knowing he was infertile. Julie snapped, angry at Bob's selfish reasoning. Realizing I couldn't bother with them anymore, I said my final words. "That's why from now on, please don't involve yourself with me and Julie. Regarding the rent for Johnson Enterprises, I won't back down until it's fully paid. If you plan to continue renting that building, please pay the overdue rent soon. Otherwise, we'll have to take legal action. I have nothing more to save you two, so goodbye." I left Bob and Julie arguing and confidently walked back to my hotel room. After returning from my trip, my husband greeted me with a smile, saying, "Welcome back. Sorry I couldn't help around the house. Was everything okay?" "Of course, it was fine. I'm glad you got to relax, Amy." "Thank you." My husband smiled warmly at me, and I felt a great sense of relief. Since marrying my current husband, I've been reassured every day, completely forgetting about Bob. Since that trip, I haven't met Bob. The following is what I heard through my father's contacts. After that incident, Bob and Julie's fights became incessant. Despite thinking he was marrying into wealth, Bob discovered Johnson Enterprises was in deep debt. Coincidentally, news was all over TV about a Johnson Enterprises employee embezzling millions of dollars from clients. Julie's father knew about the fraud, but tried to cover it up for the company's reputation. However, once the scandal became public, Johnson Enterprises' stock plummeted, having lost its credibility. The company saw a mass exodus of employees. In such a state, they couldn't possibly pay the rent. So my father was taking legal action against Johnson Enterprises. The future of the company looked bleak, entirely Johnson Enterprises' fault. Bob, having lost a fortune he thought was within his grasp, was furiously blaming everyone but himself. Thinking he could ride on the coattails of wealth was overly optimistic of Bob. Julie, realizing Bob was infertile, accused him of marriage fraud. Furthermore, after our hotel encounter, I had a lawyer demand compensation from Bob for his infidelity, leaving both him and Julie in debt. I heard that Bob and Julie ended up arguing every time they saw each other, and they finally got divorced recently. Then, unbelievably, Bob called me after divorcing Julie. "Amy, please marry me again. I have debts." Other than the alimony, Julie made me buy everything she wanted and then left without paying a dime. "You're the only one I can rely on. I'll do anything for you. Please forgive me." Bob's pleas, sounding like a beggar, were so pitiful that they almost made me sick. His unchanged attitude of marrying for money was just appalling. "No, I have no desire to be involved with you ever again. I'm going to be happy with my husband and our child, so please don't contact me again. Goodbye," I said calmly, and then immediately set his phone number to be blocked. That should stop any more absurd calls from Bob. Having lost his wife and money, Bob will likely live a lonely life now. Given his infertility, remarriage might be difficult for him. Moreover, It's hard to imagine someone falling for a person like Bob who mocks others so readily. All I could think was that he should at least try to repay his debts. I thought about it as if it were someone else's problem. As for me, I'm looking forward to my life with my husband and our soon-to-arrive baby. Both my work and personal life are more fulfilling than ever, and I'm savoring this unparalleled happiness. If the ownership of this house isn't transferred to me, I'm contemplating a divorce. I was taken aback when my husband suddenly dropped this bombshell. This house holds precious memories of our family, and I can't bear to part with it. Despite my emotional attachment, my husband is threatening me, toying with my feelings. Distraught, I reached out to my father for help. I am Emily, a 30-year-old full-time housewife, dedicating my days to supporting and managing our household. I married John 2 years ago, and since quitting my job after marriage, my husband has been the breadwinner. However, our peaceful life took a turn for the worse after my father-in-law's passing, leading to my mother-in-law moving into our apartment. Surprisingly, I was informed about my mother-in-law's move the day before she arrived. Nonchalantly, my husband announced her impending arrival as if it were the most natural thing. It caught me off guard, and I questioned the suddenness of it. I forgot to mention earlier that my mother would also be coming to live with us from tomorrow. As soon as my husband came home, he casually mentioned her arrival, asking me to prepare and clean up. I was bewildered by the news. I thought she was coming over for a visit, but my husband clarified that she was moving in. The decision was made without any prior discussion with me, and the very next day, my mother-in-law arrived with numerous luggages. It's been a while. I'm glad you look well, Mary. Please come in, I greeted her. However, she seemed displeased for some reason. As she entered, she questioned why I didn't come to pick her up, emphasizing that it's common sense to meet at the station, especially when you know your mother-in-law is arriving. While carrying the hefty luggages, I didn't know what time you'd arrive. In that case, shouldn't you have contacted me? You're so thoughtless. I apologize. This is why they say some daughter-in-laws are useless and inconsiderate. Grumbling, the mother-in-law settled heavily on the sofa. Despite being a guest in our home, she acted as if she owned the place. I couldn't believe it. From that day on, her snide comments became even more intense. As soon as my husband left for work, the barrage began. Emily, why are you sitting there? Do the dishes. You should have finished the laundry in the morning. That's common knowledge. I'm sorry, I'll do the laundry once the dishes are done. You have the wrong priorities. In my house, it's a rule to do laundry immediately after breakfast. But that rule is just to do as you're told. Haven't your parents taught you not to make excuses? I had my own daily routine, and it seemed that Mary couldn't understand that I wasn't refusing to do the work. Even if I did things her way, she would still find fault and complain every day. The daytime hours alone with her were especially challenging. One day, I had an epiphany on how to end this living hell with my mother-in-law. The plan was to move to the house I inherited from my father and live in a separate home from her. My father retired early a few months ago, and my parents started a new life in the countryside. They then passed on their house to me. Fortunately, that house isn't too far from our current apartment, and we were planning to move eventually. Living with my mother-in-law had reached my limits, so I decided to talk to my husband about moving sooner. John, can we talk for a moment? What's up? Anything happened? Remember the house my father gave us? What do you think about moving there? Oh, that house. We did talk about moving there someday. Why the sudden decision? Well, I've been having some difficulties with your mother. She never mentioned anything, but I can't bear living with her anymore. That's why I'm seriously considering moving. Observing that the new place isn't too far, I suggested we move there, allowing my mother-in-law to stay in the current apartment. Surprisingly, my husband agreed to the move. After informing Mary, we decided to make the move a week later. Honestly, I anticipated some opposition from her, but she accepted our decision with a big smile. Goodbye, John and Emily. I'm so sorry for the sudden decision to move. Don't worry about it. It's wonderful that your father gave you the house. He's very sweet. Thank you. Please visit us sometime. Of course, it's not too far from here, and I hope you visit me regularly too. I will. After the conversation, I headed to our new home with my husband, feeling relieved that I wouldn't have to endure snide remarks anymore. I could now live freely at my own pace. Although I had initially feared Mary's opposition, consulting with John brought me peace. However, my peace did not last. Despite being able to keep my distance from my mother-in-law and reduce stress, my husband started coming home late. It wasn't just the late returns. There were days when he wouldn't come home at all. He defended his actions, saying he was worried about his mother, but it became too frequent. Without informing me, he went to her house, had dinner with her, and sometimes stayed overnight, disrupting my daily life. This can't go on, I thought one day. I sat him down for a talk. John, you've been coming home really late lately, and sometimes you don't even come home at all. Is that so? I'm just worried about my mother. That's not the point. At least let me know beforehand that you'll be late, so I'll know I don't have to prepare dinner. Since you're a housewife and always at home, you can eat the leftovers for lunch the next day, right? So you're saying I should just accept everything quietly because I'm a housewife. Are you saying we shouldn't talk about this? Isn't that the truth? Housewives just relax at home. What? What are you saying? Anyway, I'm worried about leaving my mother alone. Ellie will be coming back soon, and I need to discuss some things with her. Wait, Ellie is coming back. What does he need to discuss with her? Curious, I asked my husband. We're moving Ellie here to live with us. Live together? Yes, she kept saying she wanted a big house like the one she lived abroad. That's why I thought of letting her stay in this house. What? I don't understand. Suddenly informed of this, I couldn't think of anything. Is my sister-in-law going to live in this house? I had barely escaped from Mary's constant complaints, and now his sister, Ellie, was going to live in this house. I couldn't wrap my head around it. This was the house I inherited from my father. It felt unnatural. It's the only big house that would satisfy Ellie, my husband argued. The apartment where we used to live is now where my mother stays, and it's too small for 4 people. But I never intended to live with Ellie. I don't plan to live together either. I intend to give this house to Ellie, my husband declared. What? Why? Because we plan to move back with my mother. Ellie can use this house freely, he explained. I was taken aback by my husband's unreasonable proposal and felt like fainting. Despite my repeated insistence that I had no intention of living with my mother-in-law, my husband eventually became furious. Can't you be a little more considerate? You can live because of me, so just do as I say. Enough is enough of your jokes. This house is precious to me, inherited from my father. Why should I give it to Ellie? Such a wonderful house is wasted on you, isn't it? I've already told Ellie that I've got her a large house. It's too late to say otherwise now. I wasn't consulted in any of this decision. Either way, I can't accept it. You're always complaining. Enough. Calm down and think. I'll go back to my mother's for a while. My husband angrily slammed the door and left. Left alone in the room, tears streamed down my face. I couldn't understand why my husband decided everything on his own. It's unimaginable that he intends to give away the house I inherited from my father to my sister-in-law. Every day, my husband sent me messages asking if I had calmed down and to come back soon. Each time, I had to firmly tell him that I had no intention of agreeing. Then, one day, he said something shocking over the phone. Hey, Emily, when will you come here and live with me? Stop nagging. I've said it so many times. I have no intention of living with Mary. Moving there and giving this house to Ellie. I've already told Ellie. Stop being selfish. She might be coming back this week, so there's no time. Why should I give up my house for your family? I inherited this house from my father. Don't decide on your own. Who do you think you're talking to? Even my mother is furious. I'm at my wit's end. That's not my problem. You're ignoring my feelings, I responded. My husband let out a big sigh over the phone, clearly frustrated. Then he said something shocking. If you can't listen to me, then let's divorce. Hand over the house to Ellie. Leave by tomorrow. At that moment, my love for my husband quickly faded. Threatening me with the word divorce was utterly despicable. I couldn't possibly forgive him for using divorce as a threat without considering someone's feelings. I couldn't allow these people to have their way. Burning with anger, my husband continued to speak with a triumphant and dominating tone. Listen, if you don't leave by tomorrow, I'll really divorce you. Got it? Wait, are you serious? Of course I am. You don't have a choice. What will you do if you, a housewife, get divorced? You can't survive. Enough, I get it. Good. Hurry up and move over here. My mother is looking forward to disciplining you. He hung up the phone with a confident tone, thinking I would do as he said. After that call, I made up my mind and decided to seek help from my father for a plan. The next day, everything was ready for the move. I replied calmly when asked, "By the way, I'm curious about when Ellie will be back." "She'll be back tomorrow." "Why are you so obsessed with Ellie?" "Between you and me, she seems to have made a lot from stock investments." "I see. So if you provide her with a house, maybe you can ask for financial help." "That's so like you. Anyway, you need to leave that house by today. It's inconvenient for all of us." "Don't worry. I've already moved." "What? What do you mean?" My husband seemed genuinely surprised. "I knew it. You don't want to divorce me, do you?" "Naturally. Without an income, you can't survive. But all of this is coming to an end. We're still married now, so that's why we're talking." "Wait, what? I can only think about divorce now." My husband was clearly shaken by my words. "You promised to move out of that house, right, and live with me. But you've already moved? What are you saying?" "Of course, I won't live in a house with a husband who decides everything on his own and a bullying mother-in-law." "Why are you including me? You promised to move out for Ellie." "I said I've already moved, didn't I?" "I did as you said. Enough with the jokes." "Where are you now?" My husband's tone was panicky, and he was clearly losing his cool. "Actually, I'm at my parents' house." "Why?" "I moved to my parents' rural home. I don't plan on returning to where you guys are." "You should have told me that sooner." My husband replied with a hint of relief in his voice. "If I could just give that house to Ellie. It doesn't matter where you live. It would require $3,300,000. $3,300,000. I put the house I inherited from my father up for sale. And if you truly want to give it to Ellie, buy it for $3,300 and then hand it over." "Are you joking?" "I'm serious. The house was still in my father's name, so I asked him to sell it. In reality, what I asked my father for was to sell the house. My father had always said, 'If something happens, contact me. You can live or sell this house as you like. I'll help you.' As a result of the valuation, a price of $3,300,000 was proposed, which I gladly agreed to and put the house on the market immediately." My husband probably never saw this coming. He spat out insults, consumed with anger. "Why are you doing this without asking me? This is unforgivable." "I'm not asking for nor do I need your approval. We're getting divorced soon anyway. I don't care. Do you understand your position? You'll be the one in trouble if we divorce. Since you don't have an income, you're just a housewife. I'd rather struggle on my own than be with you forever. Listen, Ellie will be coming back soon. I told you I'm relying on Ellie's money, didn't I? So what? Like I said, if you want to let dear Ellie live in that house, just buy it for $3,300,000. That is if you can." "What? That's impossible. If Ellie has made a lot of money from her investments, I don't see why she can't afford it." "I don't know how much she made, but that's too much. She can never afford it." My husband was all excuses with no hint of an apology, maintaining his domineering attitude. I felt it was foolish to spend any more time on him and unleashed everything I wanted to say. "I'm done with you and this ridiculous mess. Did you think threatening divorce would make me give up the house? If you thought being a housewife meant I'd do whatever you say, you're so wrong. Hey, let's calm down and talk." "I am calm. Isn't it you who's panicking? I won't be controlled by you or your family anymore. Stay out of my life. Go to hell with your beloved mother, you mama's boy." I shouted loudly enough for the whole neighborhood to hear, then abruptly hung up the phone. Of course, I'd had enough of these insane calls from my husband, so I blocked his number. I immediately consulted my lawyer and decided to request a divorce. It took some time, but the divorce was finalized, recognizing my husband's fault. He and Mary still live in that apartment. As for Ellie, they couldn't provide the large house she wanted, and she was furious, claiming this wasn't the deal, and made a U-turn back overseas. My ex-husband's plan to seek financial assistance from his successful sister fell through, and now he seems to be struggling financially, having to pay me alimony and support his mother. As long as he continues to live with such a selfish mother, his life will never be prosperous. On the other hand, I've moved to the countryside and am enjoying peaceful days with my parents. I recently started a clerical job at a small company introduced by a neighbor. With that salary, I can live comfortably. I plan to live here for a while. I want to be by my parents' side as much as possible to repay the kindness they show me. "I'm sorry, but we already departed while I was using the restroom at the rest area. During that time, I received a call from Luke, and I couldn't help but wonder what he wanted at such a moment. Upon answering, I overheard Luke and his in-laws laughing boisterously. When I inquired about the commotion, he shared something unbelievable. They were going to enjoy themselves with the family, and I could head back home to clean or do something productive. Anticipating this trip for a long time, I felt a mix of excitement and reservations about traveling with his family. Staying in a luxury inn was something I had looked forward to. However, the shock of being left alone at a rest area, inside the restroom stall, left me feeling deeply betrayed. Despite my anger, I lightly replied, "Okay, unforgivable." Today marked not only our wedding anniversary, but also my birthday, and we embarked on this trip. I decided that he would regret this. My name is Lucy Mitchell, a 33-year-old housewife without children, living with my husband Luke. We celebrated our one-year wedding anniversary on my birthday. Luke, with his romantic nature, always cherished our anniversaries and birthdays. He was raised in a wealthy family, and those childhood memories lingered, prompting him to celebrate special days in grand style. We met at a matchmaking agency, where men from affluent backgrounds like Luke were popular. Despite initial doubts, I approached him, and luckily, I seemed to be his type, leading to our marriage. Unbeknownst to me, after getting married, my life would take a turn for the worse. A year ago, Luke and I started our marital life in a 2-bedroom apartment in the city. Luke desired a larger house, but I disagreed, suggesting we live within our means. Despite his family's wealth, I felt guilty about our expensive $1,200 rent as a housewife. Luke assured me, "Don't worry. My dad will sort it out." As time passed, our marital life took a troubling turn. Luke's frequent visits to his parents' house, even for seemingly trivial reasons, left me feeling uneasy about our newly life. This unease grew when he casually mentioned having dinner with his parents on a regular evening without inviting me, his wife. The frequent absence and lack of inclusion in family events made me question the dynamics of our marriage. As I shared my concerns with a friend during a dinner, she expressed surprise at Luke's actions, stating, "He goes home that often and leaves you behind for a cousin's birthday. That's crazy." She had been married for 5 years, and she had more experience than me in married life. Realizing that her reaction was a common sentiment, I felt embarrassed. You're right, it's weird. But according to Luke, it's normal. Seriously, don't take this the wrong way, but hasn't he really grown up yet? Maybe upon reflection, her comment struck a chord. It's unusual for a 35-year-old, even if he's set to take over his dad's business, to prioritize family affairs after getting married. I regretted not recognizing Luke's true nature before marrying him. Returning home after dinner with my friend, I felt down. I'm home, Lucy. Where have you been? Isn't it normal for a wife to cook dinner and wait for her husband, Mrs. Mitchell? To my surprise, my mother-in-law was in the living room. Luke was apparently out, perhaps at a convenience store. Why are you here? Weren't you and Luke supposed to dine out tonight? That got canceled due to some issue at the restaurant. I thought Luke had messaged you just a bit ago. Didn't you check? She pointed it out, and I looked at my phone. Indeed, 10 minutes ago, Luke had messaged that he'd be home early, but that was just about when I got off the train. There's no way I could have gotten home and started dinner in such a short time. Yes, he did message, but I saw it just now. What the heck? This is the problem with kids from single-parent households. You can tell they weren't raised right. My mother-in-law's words stabbed me in the heart. Indeed, I was raised in a single mother's home. After my mom gave birth to me, my father passed away due to an illness. Despite that, my mother did her best to raise me lovingly. I wish she wouldn't say things that belittled my mother's hard work. It has nothing to do with being raised by a single parent. I just hadn't seen the message yet, I retorted, clearly irritated, but she brushed off my comment and changed the subject. Well, anyway, I've always noticed this, but your house is quite small. I think it's average. It's suitable for just the two of us. You can't be serious. I feel sorry for Luke, living in such a cramped space. My interactions with my mother-in-law continue to stress me out. Both my mother-in-law and father-in-law, perhaps because of their wealth, often seemed condescending. That's why I never got along with them. Realizing further conversation was futile, I silently started preparing dinner. Ignoring me, she went on and turned on the TV. From that day, she started dropping by unexpectedly more often. Even my father-in-law came along a couple of times. Mostly, they'd complain about how dirty the kitchen was or how cramped the house felt. Eventually, they'd sarcastically suggest, "You know, we have a bigger house. Why not move in?" I absolutely didn't want that. I firmly declined every time. They always visited when Luke wasn't home, so Luke didn't know about their snide remarks. I once talked to him about it, but his reply was, "Why not? Why is living together a bad idea?" I was dismayed when he too suggested moving in. From then on, I realized there was no point in discussing it with Luke, and I endured on my own. Soon, we'd be celebrating our first wedding anniversary, which also happened to be my birthday. For your birthday this weekend, I'm thinking of celebrating more grandly than last year. After all, it's also our anniversary, Luke said as he came home tipsy from work. Seeing his flushed face, I couldn't be sure of his sincerity. Knowing his love for celebrations, I felt a hint of excitement. "What? Last year, you treated me to a delicious dinner," which was more than enough. "That's nothing compared to what I've planned. Let's go on a family trip." A family trip. The term sounded odd for just the two of us. Noticing my confusion, Luke continued. "My parents, cousins, uncles, and all will join. We're heading to a luxury resort in Palm Springs." All those people, and why Palm Springs? Got a problem with a family trip? Or is it Palm Springs you're not keen on? No, it's not that. Honestly, I couldn't understand why my birthday and our anniversary would involve his family, who had nothing to do with either occasion. I couldn't grasp what Luke was thinking. I've always known he's a bit out of touch with the general populace, but I hadn't expected this level of disparity. While the choice of Palm Springs puzzled me a bit, it wasn't a major issue. Sounds fun, right, Lucy? Sometimes you've got to let loose and enjoy. Luke, in his intoxicated state, grabbed my shoulders, and I found myself nodding in agreement. For the next week, I couldn't get the trip out of my mind. At first, I was skeptical about going with his entire family. But as Luke said, it's a rare vacation, and I should make the most of it. During the trip preparations, I noticed my growing excitement, and a genuine smile crept onto my face. I knew my in-laws would probably make snide remarks as usual, but I vowed to ignore them completely. Finally, the awaited Saturday arrived. Luke and I headed to his parents' house, our meeting point for the trip. "Well, Lucy, you're late, aren't you? Do you even realize you're the star today?" Right in front of the assembled family, my mother-in-law was quick to throw shade, but it seems she did realize that I was supposed to be the star, so it took the edge off her words a bit. "I'm sorry, there was traffic," I replied. "Excuses won't do. We should leave soon. Otherwise, we'll be late to our luxury resort." All right, let's get going." Despite their grumbling about our tardiness, it was tolerable. After all, they've been making such remarks throughout the past year. Luke's cousin appeared much younger than him, looking to be in his early 20s, with a sinister look in his eyes. I began to wonder if everyone in this family was mean-spirited. My paranoia was somewhat justified when he made a belittling comment. "This is Luke's wife." Not what I expected. I diverted my gaze from him, figuring that reacting would only invite more nitpicking. I decided to show a mature demeanor. "I'm so excited. I've been to luxury resorts multiple times, but tonight's place costs $1,000 per person." Hearing the figure, $11,000, I was both shocked and had a sudden thought. No way could it be. I climbed into my in-laws' car. Once my father-in-law hit the gas, the car swiftly started moving. The journey from here to our Palm Springs destination would take about 2 hours. We decided to take a short break at the next rest stop. About an hour into our journey, I excused myself. "I'll be right back," heading to the restroom. "All right, off you go," my mother-in-law waved, as if shooing away a stray dog. I headed to the rest stop bathroom, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me, or was it just my imagination? Taking a deep breath inside the bathroom stall, I felt relieved that the trip had been relatively uneventful so far. I hoped the remainder of our journey would be equally smooth. Just as I was settling into that thought, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Luke's name on the display. Expecting him to ask me to pick something up, I casually answered the call. "I'm still in the restroom, Luke." With what sounded like amusement, he replied, alongside the laughter of my mother-in-law, "Sorry, but we've already left." There was a moment of stunned silence on my end, and laughter echoed from their side. "What do you mean?" When I asked Luke, he replied, "We're going to have fun with our family. You should just go home and clean, Lucy dear. Today's trip is just for the Mitchell family. It's a pity, but you'll have to stay behind. Goodbye." I was told the unbelievable. I had been looking forward to this trip for a long time. Having his family join us was a bit of a concern, but staying at a luxury hotel had me excited. And now, they left me alone at the rest area. I was trembling inside the restroom stall, feeling utterly betrayed. Trying to hide my anger, I responded with a light. Okay, this was unforgivable. Today was our wedding anniversary and my birthday, and they brought me on this trip. I'll make them regret this. After leaving the restroom, I called someone. The person on the other end was shocked and shared some astonishing news. I asked, "Really?" They responded, "Yes." Then the person on the phone promised to come pick me up. Left alone at the rest area like this was unbearable. Praying for a timely rescue, an hour later, my uncle came to pick me up in his car. "I'm so sorry to trouble you like this." "It's okay. It's quite an unfortunate situation." Yes, they're headed to a luxury hotel in Palm Springs. That means, my uncle tilted his head in thought, seeming to realize something. "I think that's the case," I replied. "I'm really sorry, but can you please take me there? I'll take the train back." Got it. The drive there is nice anyway. Uncle gladly accepted my request to go to Palm Springs. About an hour later, we arrived. In Palm Springs, Luke and the others came here. In front of us was a luxurious inn with a grand gate. It was a well-known hotel, The only luxury accommodation I knew of that cost $1,000 a night. At the reception, I was told, "Dinner starts at 6 p.m. Please follow me." The person who greeted me with a smile was my mother. "Lucy, it's been a while." Dressed in an elegant outfit and smiling gracefully in a manner that could seem somewhat formal to others, it was undeniably my mother. Indeed, this inn has been run by my mother's family for many years, and she currently holds the position of the innkeeper. After becoming a single mother, she began working at this inn, so to me, this place feels like home. I had called my mother from the rest area and was surprised to hear that there was a reservation today from the group at Mitchell Securities. I had a suspicion when I heard they were going to a luxury hotel in Palm Springs, but I never imagined they would be coming to our very own inn. Of course, the family doesn't know that this inn is run by my mother. Still, what a terrible story, Lucy. You can't just let this slide. Yeah, I know. That's why I came here. I see. Why don't we get you changed over here? I prepared to greet them at the dinner table. An hour later, at 6 p.m., the in-law family gathered for dinner. I hid in the next room to remain unnoticed. I slightly opened the door to observe the inside. Ah, the spa was amazing. I'd want to come here every day if I could. If it were closer, we could indeed come every day. At the very least, if you become the CEO, we could afford to come here anytime. Really looking forward to that. I mean, the subordinates handle all the work anyway. I want to become a CEO soon too. Luke and his family, thinking they were among themselves, were making some rather crude remarks. But when my mother appeared from the other side of the door and greeted them, the room went silent. Today, I will be in charge of serving you. Please let me know if you need anything. Seeing my mother bow with perfect grace, there was a tangible tension amongst the family. However, when the food was served, they resumed their inappropriate discussions. For a while, both my mother and I did nothing, simply watching the plates empty before them. It's great that we all could come. We got rid of the bothersome daughter-in-law, and the food is delicious. Perfect. If you say that, she might get angry, you know. It's fine. She's not really one of us, to be frank. She never was. After all, it would be a shame to have a child from a single-parent family in our household. Hearing her mother-in-law's harsh words, my frustration boiled to an almost uncontrollable point. At that very moment, my mother entered the room with a dessert plate loaded with cake and fruit. Today, I've heard it's Miss Lucy's birthday and also her wedding anniversary with her husband. May I know where Miss Lucy is seated? In response to my mother's question about where to place the cake, the family looked at each other confused. Nobody told you that? Excuse me, I'm the innkeeper, and I've clearly heard about it. Did Luke call? What? I didn't tell anyone. There was an awkward silence in the room, and the in-laws exchanged glances. In the end, the mother-in-law raised her hand. I am Lucy. I was too embarrassed to mention it at this age, but thank you all for the surprise. Given that the only woman in the room was the mother-in-law, her reaction was appropriate. However, my mother gave a faint smile upon seeing her act. Hey, what's so funny? Is it strange to be surprised at my age? No, not at all. I wasn't thinking that. Then what? Just bring the cake already. Yes, but before that, there's something I'd like to share. The irate mother-in-law barked at her. My mother composed herself. I swallowed hard. Lucy Mitchell is my daughter. What? Everyone present made a dumbfounded expression and raised their voices in shock. Seeing an opportunity, I swiftly opened the door from the adjacent room and stood next to my mother. Welcome. This innkeeper is my mother. It's a pleasure to meet you, Luke exclaimed. Lucy, why are you here? And what do you mean she's your mother? It means exactly that. This inn belongs to my family. I'd also intend to take over this place someday. In truth, Luke had never met my mother before. While part of it was due to my mother being busy with the inn, Luke and his parents also insisted on not meeting her face to face. I had received a phone call from Luke for our wedding introduction, but he never met her in person. I showed my mother a picture of Luke and explained who he was. It was an unconventional introduction, but I believed my mother had accepted him. From your conversations earlier, could you please refrain from mocking and belittling my mother for being a single parent? That's right. What's with the sudden drama? What grudge do you have against us? Neither Luke nor his mother nor anyone else seemed to realize the extent of the disrespect they had shown me. Exasperated, I let out my anger that had been building up. Grudges? If I have any grudges, it starts with you, Luke. I thought you were a good person when we got married, but it turns out you're a mama's boy. You married me, so you should prioritize me above all else, right? Don't join forces with your parents to mock me. Faced with my undeniable logic, Luke was rendered speechless. My mother just listened quietly to my outburst and to my in-laws. Why do you treat me this way? If you find me such a nuisance, I can leave the Mitchell family right now. What? You'll become a lonely, poor single woman. Yeah, are you sure about being alone? Both the mother-in-law and Luke sneered. Looking back and forth between my mother and me, I stared back fiercely. It's okay. Actually, I'm pregnant, so I won't be lonely. And if I inherit this inn, I won't have any financial worries. The truth is, I found out I was pregnant last week, and I hadn't told Luke yet. Only my mother knew, which is why she wasn't surprised. A child? What are you talking about? I haven't heard about this. Wait, Lucy, if that's the case, it changes things. You should have told us sooner. Upon learning I was pregnant, the family immediately changed their tune. I couldn't stand their fickle and unreasonable behavior any longer and shouted again, "No, my decision is final. Let's proceed with the divorce through lawyers. I will live happily with my child and my mother." Saying this, I'd opened the door to the hall they were in and left. The door slammed shut with a sharp noise. I'm done with this. My child will be happier without that family, whether trying to change my mind or not. I received over 30 calls a day from Luke and his parents. Eventually, I blocked all their numbers. A few days later, I received a letter from Luke informing me of our official divorce. The letter expressed his regret and pleaded for me to return, but I ignored it and tore it up. I thought he might neglect our child just like he prioritized his parents over me, and I absolutely didn't want that. Being alone and lonely would be your fate, not mine. I thought he should enjoy his bachelor life. Currently, I am nurturing my child in my womb and discussing future plans with my mother. Once the child is born and grows a bit, I plan to send them to daycare and join the inn's business. The path to becoming the next innkeeper is long, but to raise my child properly, I am determined to work hard.
How much did you get from the inheritance? Huh. That's what my husband Simon asked me the night of my father's funeral. I heard your father left $3 million. So I'll ask again. How much did you get? I felt uneasy right away. I was still grieving, and Simon's question made me anxious. So I lied. I got nothing. There's no inheritance for me. It looks like only my sister and mother got something, I added. Simon smiled broadly at that. I knew it. Your parents thought you were incompetent and didn't care about you at all. I'm glad I was right. What? I want a divorce. I can't handle being with someone who's poor now. I've already chosen who I'm going to marry next, so I want you to leave my life. With those words, Simon made me sign the divorce papers. He and his family laughed at me, thinking I was miserable. But they couldn't have been more wrong. No one will ever understand how relieved I felt when Simon betrayed me. My name is Jane. I come from a family of 4, including my younger sister Kim. Kim and I never got along well, not since we were kids. My mom, Anne, always took Kim's side and defended her every chance she got. It made me feel really lonely, but I eventually got used to it. My dad, Dan, who was the only one who supported me and could help, was always busy with work and rarely home. Growing up, despite being at home a lot, I felt deeply lonely. Even as an adult, life at home never changed. I couldn't go to college because we couldn't afford it, but once I started working, I found out Kim was going to a private college. Kim is so bright, it would be a waste not to send her, they said. Jane, you're not as sharp or smart as Kim. It would be a waste for you to go to college. Since you're an adult with a job now, you should contribute to the household. And you should also pay for Kim's tuition. You're her older sister. It's only natural for you to work and support her, my mom said, acting like this was perfectly normal. I had always endured unfair treatment, but this time, it made me furious and tears started streaming down my face. Seeing me cry, Kim looked at me disdainfully and said, "It's your own fault for being incompetent, isn't it? You're less attractive than me and you get worse grades. You should at least try harder. If you can't even manage that, then you're truly worthless." I couldn't stand the toxic atmosphere anymore, so I moved out of my parents' house when I started working. Having to do chores every day was tough, but living alone wasn't hard at all. In fact, it felt great to be independent. At first, my dad sent me a bit of money to help out, but after about 6 months, it stopped. Instead, I got a letter from my mom. "Dad's been sending you money without permission. You don't deserve it since you never paid for your sister's school or sent us any money. I'll send you an invoice for what you owe us soon. You need to pay back every cent. Stop stealing." My mom, still hating me, sent an invoice for exactly what my dad sent, calling it repayment. I was too uncomfortable to argue, so I paid up, moved to a new place in secret. A few years later, I married Simon, a coworker, and cut ties with my parents for good. So I went back to my parents' house to tell them about my marriage. When I returned, I was shocked to see my father. He had always worked hard, but now he looked much older. His back was bent, and he seemed to struggle just to stand. "Oh, so you're back." I asked my mother about my father. "What's wrong with him?" She sneered at me. "Your father injured his back last year and can't work anymore. He's always at home now, getting in my way. He's so lazy, he can barely move. He's as useless as you, Jane." Simon was taken aback by my mother's words, but his eyes brightened when he saw my sister Kim. "Wow, you're Jane's sister? You're really beautiful. It's hard to believe you two are related." Since starting college, Kim had become even more self-centered. She dressed in expensive clothes and dyed her hair in flashy colors that were quite embarrassing. Despite being an adult, she still acted like a student, which reflected her attitude towards studying. "This guy's your husband, Jane. He's pretty cool and handsome. He doesn't seem like your type at all, Jane. Honestly, I feel sorry for you, Simon," my sister said sweetly to Simon, touching him in a way that was hard to miss. It hurt to see that, but what hurt more was seeing Simon so happy and excited about her attention. "Anyway, I don't plan on staying here long. I'm going to marry Simon. I'm cutting ties with all of you." "Well, if you're going to cut me off, can you at least wait until I'm done taking care of your father?" my mom said wearily between bites of her snacks. "I need to take care of him, but I really don't want to. Kim shouldn't have to go through this either. It's her college life, and it'd be a shame to make her waste time on such a trivial, annoying matter, right? So Jane, it's your responsibility to take care of your father. You're both incompetent, so you'll get along just fine." My mom's words infuriated me, but I couldn't ignore my father's needs. From then on, I had to visit my parents' house often to look after him. Once I started helping out, I noticed neither my mom nor Kim had jobs. Kim didn't work part-time, and Mom stayed home since Dad got sick. Yet, they ate out and shopped a lot. I was shocked when I found out they'd taken Dad's bank book without permission and spent his savings like it was normal. Dad knew but didn't say anything. "Dad, they'll keep doing this if we don't stop them. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Even if I told you, Jane, they wouldn't think they did anything wrong or apologize. I didn't want to burden you any further. You've been through enough. My dad always worked hard for our family and loved me dearly. I wanted to help him however I could." Just as I was thinking of how to help, I got a call from the hospital where Dad was taken after collapsing. I rushed to my parents' house before heading to the hospital. Mom and Kim were casually watching TV, unconcerned. The hospital called about Dad collapsing. "Why are you both just sitting here?" It's an exaggeration to say he collapsed. He fell in the hallway and hit his head. The ambulance took him to the hospital, so it's up to you now. We need to go to the hospital. I'm worried about Dad. Shut up. If he doesn't make it, the insurance will cover it. Why are you getting so emotional? My mother dismissed me and turned back to the TV. Disgusted, I left them both and hurried to the hospital. At the hospital, my father lay in bed, connected to tubes, barely conscious. As he drifted in and out of awareness, he managed to speak softly. "I'm sorry for this sudden turn. I feel like I'm being punished. I failed as a father because I couldn't protect you from our family." Those were his last words before he closed his eyes. "Dad, none of that matters. I love you. Please get better," I pleaded, holding his hand tightly. But he didn't respond. A week later, a lawyer called me about my father's will. He'd informed me that it included details about his inheritance. According to the will, I, Jane, was to inherit $3 million. $3 million. I couldn't believe it. Apparently, my father had another bank book hidden away, separate from the one my mother had taken, with $3 million in it. He left a note saying he wouldn't tell anyone else about it, his way of looking out for me even after he was gone. His kindness touched me deeply once more. I had to return to my parents' house to retrieve the hidden bank book. My mother and sister were waiting at the door, acting like they owned the place. "What are you doing here now? Trying to scavenge things because Dan died? How despicable. Everything in this house belongs to me and my mother. The house, the car, everything. Don't come here acting like a thief." I knew I couldn't discuss my inheritance with people who wouldn't listen to me anyway. "Wait a minute. I'm just here to collect father's keepsakes, and shouldn't I inherit something as well?" My mother then produced a document and showed it to me. It was another will stating that my mother and sister would inherit everything from my father's estate. The handwriting looked suspiciously like my sister's, not my father's unique style. I couldn't read the will very well since Kim's handwriting isn't very clear. "Are you suggesting this is Dad's will?" "It doesn't matter what you think. This is the will. I've already informed all our relatives and neighbors about it. You can't dispute it now." Refusing to let me inside, knowing I recognized the will as a forgery, my mother blocked me from entering the house. Defeated, I returned home that day, where Simon was waiting for me. "Were you at your parents' house?" "If you had told me, I would have come with you. I wanted to meet Kim." "Why are you so interested, Simon? This doesn't concern you." "I went there to receive my inheritance from Dad, but they kicked me out." "Wow, how much did everyone inherit from your father?" "I'm not sure of the total, but he owned the house, land, and everything, so it's quite substantial." "I see. How much do you get, Jane?" I stopped myself. I couldn't tell him the truth. My gut feeling said there was no inheritance for me. It was all going to my mother and sister. Hearing this, Simon grabbed divorce papers from his room and handed them to me. "I knew it. I knew you wouldn't get anything. You're really tied to that family. Well, with a perfect sister like that, I guess it's no surprise, right? But to inherit nothing, how much do they despise you? I want a divorce now because there's no benefit for me if we stay together. Honestly, I've been in contact with your sister Kim a lot lately, and you're just in my way." Simon had already signed his part of the divorce papers, so naturally, I signed them too. I fought hard to hide my smile as I watched Simon happily carry the divorce papers to the city office. It felt like the last time I'd see him smile like that, and that goes for my mother and sister too. It was the moment when karma caught up with those who had tormented my father and me all those years. Later that day, I met with the lawyer who handled my father's will and asked him to accompany me to my parents' house. There, when I showed my mother and sister the real will, their usual calm expressions turned pale as they read it over and over again. "That's a lie. I have a will here that clearly states only Kim and I are supposed to inherit." "Then let's settle this with a handwriting analysis. If it's proven the fake will was intentionally made, you could face charges of fraud. Are you okay with that?" The lawyer's challenge left my mother speechless. I've also heard from Dan about many things. He said even as his health declined, you neglected him, sold his belongings without permission, and did as you pleased. Kim, you were involved in risky behavior with men and gambling, paying off debts with his personal bank book without permission. Due to this misconduct, both of you have been disinherited. If you interfere with Jane's inheritance rights, we'll pursue legal action against you as well. As the lawyer finished, both my mother and sister sat there in disbelief. I decided to retrieve my father's hidden bank book and leave their house for good. Finally, I was completely free from my family. After that, Simon, unaware of the truth, apparently confessed to my sister and started dating her. My mother and sister, keeping the inheritance issues hidden, quickly marry him to support their lifestyle and use him like an ATM. Simon, oblivious to their schemes, bought several luxury cars and quit his job, relying on what he thought was their inheritance. Eventually, Simon began to suspect something was wrong. When he realized there was no inheritance, he urgently contacted me. "Jane, I was mistaken. You're all I have. I want to start over." "Well, I don't need you. Besides, you have Kim now. Take care of your wife properly, okay?" I said calmly and hung up. In fact, just minutes before Simon called, I received a call from Kim as well. "You've destroyed my life." Simon quit his job and went on a spending spree as soon as we got married. "I can't believe I married a man who only cares about money. He's ruined our family name. What are you going to do about it?" I responded calmly to my sister, who was shouting hysterically. "Kim, you're just as money-minded as him. You two are a perfect match, really. And I heard you and Simon got along very well while he and I were married. You should be happy your love worked out. I'll file for compensation for the affair later, though. From now on, let's communicate through our lawyers. I never want to hear from you again. But I'm your sister. You're not treating me like family. Don't make me laugh. You were the one who didn't treat me like family." With those words, I ended the call with my sister, blocked her number, and never heard from her again. I finally felt free. With my father's inheritance, I built a house and moved in. I found a new job as an office clerk and now enjoy a busy but satisfying life on my own. Sometimes I feel lonely, but I have my memories of my father to comfort me. "I'm heading out now, Dad." I felt my father's gentle smile watching over me as I looked at his picture hanging on the wall of my home.
"Emily, is Grandpa behaving himself?" "Well, sort of. He injured his leg. Old people can be such a nuisance. I wish they'd think about those of us who have to take care of them." "Patricia, that's not a nice way to say it. It's fine. He's already declining quite a bit. I can't handle the fuss of old people, but you're used to it, so you'll be fine." "The other day, my husband's grandfather, Michael, fell in a garden and injured his leg. It's not a serious injury, but he's already 82 years old. Because of his age, we're having him rest in bed just to be safe so it doesn't get worse. My mother-in-law won't even go near him, let alone take care of him. I'm Emily, 30 years old. I married 3 years ago and live with my husband Daniel's family. My husband was my boss at the company where I worked, a company founded by his grandfather. When I joined 8 years ago, my father-in-law was already the president and my grandfather-in-law was the chairman. But back then, the grandfather was still handling all the important tasks and responsibilities of the company. 2 years ago, when Grandpa turned 80, he remained chairman but handed over most of the public duties to my father-in-law. "Michael, you've worked hard all this time. Now, leave the company matters to Christopher and take it easy," my mother-in-law said with a smile, but her words sounded sarcastic to me. Grandfather-in-law is a bit stubborn but a fair and kind person with a good reputation. In contrast, my father-in-law seems somewhat immature, never expressing his opinions clearly and utterly unreliable compared to Grandpa. And he always does whatever my mother-in-law says. My grandmother-in-law has already passed away, and I never met her. My husband and I started dating when we worked together on the same product planning team 3 years after I joined the company. My husband, energetically leading the team, seemed reliable to me, though a bit self-righteous. Maybe I felt that way because I lost my father early and grew up with just my mother. My mother also passed away from illness 2 years ago, and now I have no family other than my in-laws. Shortly after I got married, my mother fell ill and needed care, so I quit my job to take care of her. The fact that my husband's family didn't object was probably due to a single comment from Grandpa. "It's only natural to take care of the mother who raised you alone. Don't worry and take good care of her." Thanks to that, I was able to be by my mother's side every day for a year without financial worries until she passed away. My mother-in-law seemed a bit dissatisfied, but I was truly grateful. However, since Grandpa handed over the company to my father-in-law, everyone's attitudes towards him have gradually changed. They no longer listen to his opinions as much, and I can't shake the feeling that they're treating him carelessly. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but watching my mother-in-law and husband's behavior, I can't help but feel that way. My father-in-law's attitude is non-committal, but it feels like he's ignoring Grandpa as if he's no longer needed since he's practically retired. Watching my in-laws' behavior, I feel somewhat angry. Hey, don't you think your attitude, Patricia, and yours too, is a bit cold towards Grandpa? So what's the big deal? Grandpa tries to talk to you and you barely respond. You don't even try to help them. Like I have time to deal with old people. You can take care of Grandpa. You're the one with the free time. You don't have to talk like that. Quiet, I'm tired from work. Don't nag me about unnecessary things. This is how it goes no matter. They won't listen to me. My grandfather-in-law doesn't say anything to his family about this. Now I'm the only one who talks to my grandfather-in-law at home. Grandpa, the weather is nice today. Shall we go for a little walk outside? Your leg seems to be healing well, and I think it will be good rehabilitation. Thank you. Let's go out for a bit then. The two of us went to the park, where there were several families with children playing around. My grandfather-in-law looked at the scene with joy. Christopher and Daniel enjoyed times like that too. Grandpa, I was busy with work and couldn't take care of the children much. Maybe that's why I couldn't raise Christopher and Daniel properly, my grandfather-in-law said with a slightly sad face, almost like he was talking to himself. Christopher is my father-in-law, and Daniel is my husband. I think about how everyone can be kinder to my grandfather-in-law, but I can't come up with a good idea. But then my in-laws suggested building a house for my grandfather-in-law. This house is over 50 years old, right? The layout is bad, it's hard to use. But instead of spending money on repairs, it would be better to build a new house in a more convenient location. A new house? Michael is getting older, and it's good that he only got injured last time, but we never know what will happen. So let's make the house barrier-free so we won't have trouble if care is needed. I see. We can even put Michael's room in the middle so everyone can take care of him easily. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Right, so it's settled then. And Michael, at the cost. If it's a house for all of us, I'll take care of it. Talk to Mr. Jones about the money. Typical Michael, thank you. We appreciate it, my mother-in-law smiled happily. It seems to me that they only flatter him when they want money. But if everyone takes care of my grandfather-in-law after moving to the new house, I thought there could be nothing better. Mr. Jones is the company's in-house counsel and also manages my grandfather-in-law's personal assets. My grandfather-in-law liked his character and made him in-house counsel, and it's been nearly 30 years. He is 58 now and the person my grandfather-in-law trusts the most. I've met him several times and he seems to be a very honest person. He always cares about my grandfather-in-law's health, and sometimes I think he's more like a son than his real sons. Having such people around my grandfather-in-law makes me feel a little relieved. I wasn't informed about the details of the house being built, but my mother-in-law seemed very cheerful, and the three of them were looking at interior design magazines and discussing various things, so it seemed to be going smoothly. Then something unexpected happened. It was revealed that my grandfather-in-law had a debt of $1,820,000. Wait, what's this about $1,820,000? I exclaimed. My grandfather-in-law had become a co-signer for a loan for a friend's company, but that company was in trouble, and the debt had become my grandfather-in-law's responsibility. Wait, they're not going to take the house. It's under construction, are they? Since the contract has already been completed, and as Patricia said, it's in the president's name, so it's fine, my mother-in-law seemed relieved at those words. Oh, thank goodness. I'm glad we did it my way. Listening to that conversation, I learned for the first time that the house was in my father-in-law's name. Even though my grandfather-in-law had paid for it, putting it in my father-in-law's name seemed just like something my mother-in-law would do. I also wondered why they didn't think of giving up the house to help repay the debt. Hey, this debt is Michael's fault, and it has nothing to do with us or the company, right? Well, it was signed in Michael's name. Oh good, then there's no problem. I couldn't understand what was good about it, but since my grandfather-in-law didn't say anything during that conversation, I didn't intervene either. After all, it's not an amount I could handle. A few days later, my grandfather-in-law's behavior began to change gradually. Grandpa, what would you like to eat for lunch? Who are you calling Grandpa? I'm only 50. You have no right to call me that. Huh? Sorry, Emily, right? I was lost in thought. At first, I thought he was just deep in thought, and when it happened repeatedly, I began to feel uneasy. Patricia, what are you doing? Where's my meal? Grandpa, I'm Emily. Patricia is your daughter-in-law. You ate your meal earlier. Didn't eat? Are you trying to starve me? I wondered if my grandfather-in-law's condition was triggered by the $1,820,000 debt, and seeing that none of his family members were trying to help him might have been a double shock. I tried to persuade my grandfather-in-law to go to the hospital, but he adamantly refused. He might not want to admit that he could have dementia. I didn't want to force him, but I felt helpless on my own. I consulted my husband, but he simply brushed it off, saying it had nothing to do with him. My mother-in-law wasn't any help either, so I turned to my father-in-law as the only option. "Yeah, I heard from Patricia, Daniel. They think it might be dementia. Can you go to the hospital with us?" I asked him. "But it's not that bad yet, right? If we go to the hospital, others will find out my father has dementia," he responded. "There are good medications now that can slow the progression." "Well, there's no need to rush. Let's watch him a little longer. Emily is here, so they'll be fine, right?" I couldn't help but feel frustrated by their lack of concern. I couldn't depend on them. "Grandpa, let's go to the hospital. Let's see you properly examined," I urged. "Who are you? Where are you planning to take me? You're up to no good," he retorted. I felt tears welling up, seeing how stubborn my once kind grandfather-in-law had become. But my mother-in-law just laughed, amused. "Even if he was the chairman, it's over for him now." "But now everything, even the company, is all Christopher's," she remarked casually.
"Patricia, Grandpa isn't completely unaware. He's listening to everything. He'll forget everything soon. He'll start wandering, dribbling. Just thinking about it gives me chills. He's nothing but a nuisance now," I protested. "How can you say that? Grandpa has worked hard for the family all of his life." My mother-in-law's words made me both angry and sad. But my grandfather-in-law just smiled. "See, this old man doesn't understand anything," she added, laughing. "Patricia, I was furious at my mother-in-law's callousness. But soon the new house would be ready. Perhaps things might change once we move there. Since it's a house that Grandpa built, the family might show some gratitude and be kind to him." I couldn't completely abandon that faint hope. And 2 months later, the house was finally built. For days, I had been compelled to pack my in-laws' and husband's belongings, while my father-in-law's and my own items remained mostly untouched. Even when I attempted to organize my things, my in-laws and husband kept assigning me tasks, preventing any progress. However, I reasoned it would be okay to relocate the smaller items later since this house wasn't disappearing. On moving day, after transferring most of the belongings, I went to call my father-in-law, but my husband intercepted me. "Ah, you and Grandpa can stay here," he announced. "What? You can stay in his house? We don't need any extra baggage in the new house. In other words, you and Grandpa will live here from now on, and I'll give you Grandpa's debt too." "Well, you can at least be a housekeeper. Hey, let's go." "Yeah, I'm coming. Good luck with all the debt repayment and live-in care." My in-laws cheerfully departed, leaving me stunned. For a while, I couldn't comprehend what had just occurred. Were we abandoned, not just me, but also my grandfather-in-law, only they would reside in the new house? It took me some time to grasp because it was beyond my imagination that someone could be so cruel. How should I explain this to my grandfather-in-law? Slowly, I made my way back to the rear room. I didn't mind caring for my grandfather-in-law at all. That was my intention from the start. As I timidly prepared to call out to him, noticing his back facing me, he seemed to sense my presence and turned around before I could speak. "Have they gone already?" His expression as he uttered those words looked entirely different from what it had been just months ago. To be honest, he seemed like a different person. I wondered if a new symptom had emerged, but the next moment my grandfather-in-law smiled, and his subsequent words caught me off guard. As I was talking to my grandfather-in-law, Mr. Jones came. "Chairman, have you finished getting rid of the unnecessary staff?" "Yes, it's all done. Let's go, shall we?" Where are we going?" "Of course, to the new house." I left the house where I had been residing, guided by my grandfather-in-law, without fully understanding what was unfolding. The following month, my mother-in-law and husband bombarded me with countless calls. My grandfather-in-law declared he wouldn't entertain their calls anymore, but I answered my husband's call due to the looming divorce. "Hey, Emily, is Grandpa with you? When I went to the old house, it was up for sale. It's not worth $1,820,000, so you can't repay the debt." "Is that why you did that?" my husband interrogated. "What do you mean?" "Put Grandpa on. Dad said he can't get in touch at all. That forgetful old man has done something outrageous." I knew what he was referring to, but I wanted to hear my husband's side of the story. "Grandpa sold the company's stocks to the executive director. Thanks to that, The executive director became the largest shareholder, and a shareholders' meeting and board meeting were held, resulting in Dad being dismissed as president. But the executive director is well-liked, and maybe Grandpa thought it was better to hand over the company to him. The executive director must have deceived the senile old man into selling the stocks. This is invalid. You seem to be misunderstanding something, but Grandpa doesn't have dementia. If anything, he seems more coherent than before. What? Until that moving day, I genuinely believed that my grandfather-in-law had dementia. It appears that my grandfather-in-law harbored suspicions from the moment my mother-in-law mentioned building a house to live with him. So he devised a plan. He feigned dementia to observe how my in-laws and husband would react. As anticipated, they revealed their true colors, one after another. In the end, they left my grandfather-in-law and me behind. I struggled to contain my laughter because everything unfolded exactly as I had expected. My grandfather-in-law then said, I found myself surprised, relieved, and slightly conflicted. To deceive the enemy, you must first deceive your allies, my grandfather-in-law chuckled. It seemed he had been receiving regular updates on the company from the executive director and Mr. Jones. With my grandfather-in-law gone, my father-in-law and husband acted as they pleased, self-righteous, and completely ignoring the opinions of the employees, often entertaining at the company's expense. Eventually, my grandfather-in-law handed over the company to my father-in-law, but he harbored concerns about the future, leading him to take decisive action. In the end, he decided he couldn't entrust it to his son and left it to the executive director. I explained. What about the $1,820,000 debt? My husband inquired. That's gone now, I replied. Indeed, my grandfather-in-law had been a guarantor for a friend's dad, but he had personal assets exceeding that amount. However, I deliberately omitted this information to avoid my mother-in-law and husband targeting those assets. The friend was the son of a benefactor who had helped my father-in-law when he was young. Moreover, the countryside land owned by the son was going to be developed into a resort, allowing him to sell it at a high price. I explained further. You're kidding, my husband exclaimed. More importantly, are you guys okay? I asked, concerned. We're not okay. Both my father and I were denounced by the company. What should we do now? My husband lamented. Well, there's also the mortgage on the house, I revealed. What? What do you mean, the mortgage on the house? My husband was taken aback. Haven't you realized it yet? The house money should have all been paid by Grandpa, I clarified. Christopher signed without checking everything. It shows he really didn't have the qualities of a president, I added. You're kidding, my husband sighed. As a consequence, my parents-in-law lost the house they had built because they couldn't pay the mortgage. Now they reside in an old apartment over 50 years old, struggling to repay the unpaid loan. Despite their alternating attempts to contact me, suggesting we all live together, it was impossible now. My grandfather-in-law retired from his chairman position and bought an old house in the countryside. Emily, you can go and live wherever you like freely. You don't have to worry about living expenses, my grandfather-in-law assured me. But I chose to be with him. If I'm not in the way, please let me be with you, I expressed, tears welling up in my eyes. My grandfather-in-law's eyes welled up too. Thanks to Mr. Jones, the divorce was finalized and procedures were taken to exclude my former father-in-law and former husband from inheritance. I became my grandfather-in-law's adopted daughter. If anything happens to him, I intend to take care of him until the end. Now, the two of us enjoy working in the fields together. Dad, look at this radish, it's big, I exclaimed as warm moments flowed in the pouring sunlight. I wish for these days to continue, even just one day longer.
My name is Clara, a 32-year-old woman who, once a firm believer in fairy tale endings, saw her life take an unexpected turn 3 years ago when I met Mark, the man who would eventually become my husband. Our story unfolds as a journey of love, trust, and eventual betrayal against the backdrop of what seemed like a perfect marriage. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday morning when fate led me to the Corner Cafe, a John Grisham novel in hand, lost in the world of legal thrillers. That's when Mark entered, immediately noticeable with an air of confidence and a warmth in his smile that felt inviting. "Hey, is that Grisham's latest?" he asked, nodding towards my book, his friendly voice tinged with genuine curiosity. "Yeah, just started it. He's always a good read," I responded, pleasantly surprised by the ease of our conversation. We delved into discussions about our favorite authors, and our conversation flowed effortlessly. In the weeks that followed, Mark and I grew closer. Our shared interests in music, particularly old jazz, and a mutual love for exploring hidden bookstores around the city cemented our bond. Mark was charming, respectful, and attentive, and each encounter felt like catching up with an old friend. One evening, as we walked along the river, Mark's tone turned serious. "Clara, I've never felt this way before. I think I'm falling for you," he confessed under the dim glow of the streetlights. His words sent a rush of warmth through me, and I admitted, "I feel the same, Mark. You're unlike anyone I've ever met." 6 months flew by, and our relationship only grew stronger. During a cozy dinner at my apartment, Mark proposed, and there was no hesitation in my yes. I loved him, and I believed in our future together. The joy of our engagement, however, was soon met with apprehension as the time came to meet Mark's parents. His mother, Linda, was a stern woman with piercing eyes that seemed to judge my every move, while his father was more amiable but carried an undeniable seriousness, especially regarding the institution of marriage. During a formal dinner at their house, Mark's father brought up the subject of a prenuptial agreement. "It's just practical," he stated matter-of-factly. The request caught me off guard, but given my past experience with a cheating ex-boyfriend, I understood the necessity. "I agree, but I have a condition," I said, steadying my voice. "If either of us cheats, the cheater owes the other $100,000. Mark's expression was a mix of surprise and respect. "I promise, Clara, I'd never cheat on you," he said earnestly. Our wedding was a beautiful affair, filled with laughter, dancing, and promises of forever. The first year of our marriage felt like living in a dream. We traveled to romantic destinations, enjoyed quiet evenings at home, and supported each other's ambitions. Mark was not just my husband. He was my best friend and confidant. After the whirlwind of our wedding, Mark and I settled into married life with an ease that surprised even me. Our first year was like living in a bubble of happiness, untouched by the outside world. Our honeymoon in Paris was a dream, strolling along the Seine as two lovebirds lost in a city of love. "Can you believe we're here?" I inquired of Mark one evening as we observed the Eiffel Tower lighting up. He drew me close and responded, "With you, I can believe anything. This is just the start for us, Clara." Those days were filled with laughter, romantic dinners, and promises of a shared future. Returning home with a suitcase full of memories, our bond felt unbreakable. In our daily routine, Mark would bid me farewell each morning before work, and I'd have dinner waiting for him upon his return. Our conversations stretched late into the night, discussing everything and nothing. One night, while cleaning up after dinner, Mark remarked, "You know, I never thought I'd be this happy doing mundane stuff like washing dishes." I playfully splashed water at him, and he laughed, catching it in his hands. "That's because you've got an amazing wife. It's all about good company," he said. "Absolutely the best decision of my life marrying you." Despite the growing pressure from external expectations, particularly the anticipation of starting a family, our happiness persisted. Linda, Mark's mother, would drop not-so-subtle hints at family gatherings, asking, "So when are we going to hear some good news?" I brushed it off with a joke, but her persistence strained me over time. Mark reassured me, saying, "Don't let my mom get to you. We'll start a family when we're ready, not minutes sooner." Our first year of marriage was magical, celebrated with a quiet dinner at home. Mark surprised me with a necklace I had admired months ago. "Happy anniversary, Clara. Here's to many more years of happiness," he said, his eyes shining with love. As we cuddled on the couch that night, I felt incredibly fortunate. However, as our second year of marriage began, the pressure from Mark's family, particularly Linda, took a toll. It wasn't just about starting a family. Her criticisms infiltrated every aspect of our lives. Linda's disapproval, often hidden in seemingly helpful comments, turned every visit into a nightmare. One afternoon, as I set the table for lunch, Linda walked into the kitchen, eyeing the spread with a disapproving frown. "Is this what you're serving? A bit simple, don't you think?" she remarked, her tone dripping with disdain. Clenching my jaw, I tried to maintain composure. Her critiques extended beyond my cooking, finding fault in everything from house decorations to how I spent my free time. One evening, relaxing in the living room, Linda gave her unsolicited opinion, stating, "You know, Clara, if Mark gave me the money he spends on you." I contemplated hiring a proper cleaner and cook. Mark appeared uncomfortable, but he remained silent. His quiet response felt like a betrayal, and though seething with frustration, I managed to say, "Well, Linda, I'm doing my best here." The hurt intensified as Mark's attitude began to mirror his mother's criticisms, albeit in a more subtle manner. Following one of Linda's visits, Mark casually suggested, "Mom might have a point about the house. Maybe we should consider getting some help." A pang of hurt and frustration hit me, and I questioned, "So you think I can't handle it either?" He backpedaled, saying, "No, that's not what I meant." But the damage was done. Constant criticisms and Mark's growing detachment strained our marriage, leading to arguments over trivial matters and transforming our once easy conversations into tense exchanges. After a particularly heated argument, I found myself wondering aloud, "What happened to us, Mark? We used to be on the same team." He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated, and replied, "I don't know, Clara. Everything feels so complicated now." That night, I went to bed feeling lonely and misunderstood. Linda's insidious comments had invaded not only our home, but also our marriage, making me question whether the love Mark and I shared could withstand this constant barrage of negativity. As the third year of our marriage unfolded, a sense of unease settled in my heart. The once bright flame of our love seemed to flicker under the shadow of doubt and distrust. It all started with repeated phone calls from a name that kept popping up on Mark's phone, Jake. Mark's demeanor changed whenever that name flashed on the screen. One evening, as we watched TV, his phone rang again, and I couldn't help but notice the nervous glance he threw my way. "Who's Jake?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my heart pounded. "Just a new guy at work, no one important," Mark replied, but his voice was too nonchalant, and his answer seemed rehearsed. Mark's behavior continued to shift. He started coming home late from work with flimsy and inconsistent excuses. His wardrobe underwent a transformation, shifting from casual to sharply tailored suits. One night, as he prepared to leave for another late night at work, I questioned, "Working late again?" noticing his dressed-up appearance. "Yeah, big project," he said without meeting my eyes. "Don't wait up." Frustration boiled over, and I confronted him one day, saying, "This isn't like you, Mark. What's really going on?" My voice trembled with a mixture of anger and fear. Mark sighed, displaying a mix of guilt and annoyance. "I told you, it's just work. Why can't you trust me?" I shot back, "Because you're hiding something. You're never here, and when you are, it's like you're a million miles away." Mark didn't respond. He just grabbed his coat and left, leaving me standing there feeling more alone than ever. That night, lying in our empty bed, I made a decision. I couldn't live in this limbo of doubt and suspicion. I needed to know the truth, whatever it was. The next morning, I called a private detective. It felt like a betrayal, but the constant worry and uncertainty were eating me alive. I needed answers and was determined to get them, no matter what they revealed about the man I thought I knew. The days after contacting the private detective were a haze of anxiety and anticipation. I felt like I walked a tightrope, desperately trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, while my world quietly crumbled around me. Then the call came, shattering my last hope. "Mrs. Johnson, we have conclusive evidence. I'm afraid your suspicions were correct." The detective's voice was solemn. heavy with the weight of the news he was delivering. He explained that Mark had been having an affair, and the mysterious Jake on his phone was actually a woman. My heart sank as he detailed their meetings, providing timestamps and photos. It was irrefutable. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling a mix of devastation and vindication. My worst fears weren't just fears anymore. They were cold, hard facts. Despite the pain, I decided not to confront Mark immediately. I needed more than just the evidence of his infidelity. I needed to understand the full extent of his deceit. One evening, as I passed by his home office, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. Mark was talking to his mother, Linda. "Mom, I'm planning to end it with Clara after your birthday." Mark's voice was cold, devoid of any affection he once had for me. "Oh, that's wise, dear. Make sure she gets me a nice 65th birthday present before you drop the bomb," Linda replied, her voice laced with a callousness that took my breath away. I leaned against the wall, feeling nauseous. Not only was my husband unfaithful, but he and his mother were plotting against me, waiting to use me for one last expensive gift before discarding me. Fueled by a mixture of anger and resolve, I decided to play along. I continued as if nothing was wrong while secretly gathering more evidence of Mark's infidelity. The detective provided me with everything: photos, videos, and even audio recordings. I was building my case, preparing for the moment I would strike back. As I lay in bed each night next to the man who had betrayed me, a plan began to form in my mind. I would wait until after Linda's birthday. I would give them the illusion of victory. Let them think they had outsmarted me. But when they least expected it, I would reveal everything and turn the tables. As Linda's 65th birthday approached, I put on a mask of ignorance, acting as though everything was normal. Inside, I was a cauldron of emotions: anger, betrayal, and a fierce determination to see my plan through. A few days before the birthday, Linda casually mentioned her upcoming celebration during a family dinner. "So, Clara, I'm expecting a grand 65th birthday. You must have planned something special for me," she said with a sly smile, clearly anticipating a lavish gift. Keeping my emotions in check, I replied with faint enthusiasm, "Of course, Linda. I've arranged a dinner at the city's most luxurious restaurant. It'll be a night to remember." Her eyes lit up with glee, not realizing the trap I was setting. "How wonderful! I can't wait. Just a small family gathering, right?" she asked. "Yes, very intimate and exclusive. Just for close family," I confirmed, my words laced with hidden irony. Later that night, Mark approached me, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "That's quite a generous plan for Mom's birthday. Are you sure about this?" I looked at him, maintaining my composure. "Absolutely. It's a significant birthday, and I want to do something special for her." Mark seemed appeased, but I could tell he was puzzled by my willingness to indulge his mother. As the day of the dinner drew near, I managed the final arrangements meticulously, confirming the booking under Linda's name, double-checking the guest list, and ensuring everything was in place for the grand evening. Playing the role of the dutiful wife and daughter-in-law, I concealed my true intentions beneath a facade, ready to expose the betrayal and deceit that had corroded our marriage. The night before the dinner, as I lay in bed, a twisted sense of satisfaction enveloped me. I was mere hours away from turning the tables on Mark and Linda. They believed they were using me for one last benefit before discarding me, unaware that I held the reins of the game. The evening of Linda's 65th birthday unfolded in a luxurious restaurant, every detail meticulously planned to reflect the grandeur of the occasion. While Linda reveled in the opulence, I played the part of the gracious daughter-in-law, masking my inner turmoil with a practiced smile. As the dinner drew to a close, the waiter presented the bill, a hefty $4,500. With a steady hand, I reached for my card, my heart pounding. After swiping the card, I glanced around the table, observing Linda's satisfied smirk and Mark's uneasy expression. "Thank you for such a wonderful evening, Clara. This is truly generous," Linda said, her voice dripping with insincerity. Seizing the moment, Mark leaned in with a mocking tone. By the way, Clara, I want a divorce. His words struck me like a physical blow, but I refused to let them see my pain. Linda chimed in sharply. Well then, I guess you should leave. This is a family gathering after all. Without a word, I stood up and left the restaurant, my dignity intact despite the turmoil inside. As I walked away, I swiftly canceled the payment on my phone and blocked the shared account, ensuring Mark couldn't cover the cost either. Back at home, I packed my belongings quickly, the finality of my actions setting in. I was leaving this chapter of my life behind, stepping into an uncertain but hopeful future. Soon, my phone erupted with calls. I answered, and Linda's voice, shrill with rage and panic, filled my ears. The payment didn't go through. The restaurant staff called the police. What have you done? Her words were a cacophony of anger and disbelief, but I remained silent, letting her tirade wash over me. This was their doing, their betrayal and manipulation coming back to haunt them. After hanging up, I looked around the empty house, once filled with dreams and love, now just a hollow shell. I took a deep breath, stepped out the door, and didn't look back. Their calls continued, desperate pleas for help that I no longer felt obliged to answer. I had closed that chapter of my life for good. In the end, they paid. Mark had to borrow from his parents, but I didn't care where the money came from. It was a small compensation for the betrayal, but more importantly, it was closure. Sitting in the lawyer's office, signing the last of the papers, I felt a sense of peace. The journey had been painful, full of betrayal and heartache. But I had come out stronger, more resilient. Walking out into the sunlight, I felt like a free woman ready to start anew. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. After all the darkness, I finally felt like I was stepping into the light.
I'm Harley. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a bold and self-reliant woman. Let me tell you about the crazy journey of my relationship with my husband, Dominic. Get ready, because it's going to be a wild ride. Dominic and I had our ups and downs, like most couples. Even though I loved him a lot, there was one big problem. His mom, Charlotte. She was always critical of me. No matter what I did, she never seemed happy. Whenever we have family gatherings, Charlotte would make mean comments about my cooking. She acted like she was a fancy chef and I couldn't cook at all. She complained about the taste, how things looked, and say I wasn't as good as her. It felt like she was trying to prove that I wasn't good enough for her son. But it wasn't just about my cooking. Charlotte had a talent for making me feel small in other ways too. Once, at a dinner party, I proudly told everyone about a big promotion I got at work, hoping for a pat on the back. Instead, she just brushed it off like it was no big deal, saying it wasn't as good as what her friends' kids had achieved. It made me feel invisible, like she didn't care about my success. And our wedding? It should have been a happy day, but Charlotte made it her mission to criticize everything, from where we had it to what colors we used. Nothing was good enough for her. She'd whisper her disapproval to anyone who'd listen, ruining what should have been the best day of my life. You'd think my husband, Dominic, would stand up for me, right? Well, not quite. Bless him, he had this weird blind spot when it came to his mom. He couldn't see how she treated me, made me feel small, and acted like I didn't matter. It hurt a lot. And his dad, Caleb, was the only one who seemed to get it and call her out. But I wish Dominic would be the one to stand up for me. After all, I was his wife, his partner, and I deserved his support no matter what. But every time, I felt let down. Dominic stayed quiet, letting his mom's words hurt me over and over again. It was like being cut by tiny knives, again and again. I wanted his love, but I also wanted him to stick up for me. It wasn't just about defending me from Charlotte's mean comments. It was about fighting for our relationship and showing me I was important. I hoped he'd see through his mom's tricks and put us first. But it seemed like he was stuck in the family drama, unable to break free. As time went on, I started to feel more and more frustrated. I felt like he didn't care about me or what I needed. It was like we were stuck in a bad cycle that we couldn't get out of. The beginning of the end came when Dominic said he had to go on yet another business trip, this time to Tampa for a week. Another trip? Seriously, Dominic? It's a really important meeting that couldn't wait, babe, he said. But you just got back from another one. Can't someone else do it? And why Tampa all of a sudden? I asked, surprised. He had only just come back from a different business trip, so this sudden one made me wonder. I tried to tell him how I felt, hoping he'd understand, but his answers didn't help much. But I let it go. I'll bake, even though I'm not sure about this. You know, sometimes things just come up unexpectedly in business, I said reluctantly. Yeah, it's just business, okay. Even though I had my doubts, I didn't push it too much, and off he went on this business trip. The first 3 days of Dominic's trip went by, and my suspicions got even stronger. I decided to FaceTime him, like I usually did when he was away, but he kept choosing audio calls instead. Hey, can we do a video chat tonight? Sorry, the hotel Wi-Fi isn't great, so audio calls are better for now. But everything's fine, don't worry. Wi-Fi problems, it seemed too convenient, didn't it? Babe, don't worry about it, Dominic reassured me. But I couldn't help but worry. Sometimes I hear a woman's voice in the background, and it made my doubts grow stronger, making me even more uneasy. I felt like Dominic was hiding something, like there was more to this trip than he was letting on. The trust between us was starting to crack, leaving me with a sense of uncertainty that hung over our relationship. Despite my doubts, I stayed quiet and accepted his excuses for those 3 days. It was hard to believe. 3 whole days had gone by, and I still hadn't seen Dominic. Not only did he avoid video calls, but our audio calls kept getting shorter and shorter. I had to find out what was really going on. On the 4th day, I tried to FaceTime Dominic again, hoping to get some answers. But when the call connected, instead of seeing Dominic, it was Charlotte who answered. She was sitting in a beach chair with sunglasses on and a tan. I was shocked. Charlotte, what are you doing there? Where's Dominic? She smirked, looking pleased with herself. Oh, Harley dear, you didn't think he was on a business trip, did you? Honestly, I can't say he needed to go to Tampa to keep this from you, but I suppose that just shows how pushy you can be. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dominic had lied to me, and his mother was there, enjoying herself while I was left in the dark. Anger started to bubble up inside me as I realized they had been deceiving me. So you're telling me you both planned this secret vacation without me? Well, yes, she admitted. Why? I demanded. Because I wanted to visit my hometown, and I wanted to do it with my son. Is that so wrong? Charlotte replied. Of course not. But why keep it a secret? Why exclude me? I pressed. Because this trip is just for me and my son, she explained. But I'm his wife. I should have been included. This could have been a chance for us to work out whatever issues you have with me, and I could really use a vacation too, I argued. Well, tough luck. You didn't get one. Sorry, not sorry, Charlotte retorted. I'm going to set aside your childish behavior for a moment to say this. Even if you wanted this special trip without me, that would have been okay. I'm an adult, you can tell me if I'm not invited to something. I can handle it. But here's the thing. We kept it a secret from you because we simply didn't want you to know. It's as simple as that. We didn't care if you wanted to come or if you would have been okay with us going alone. We just didn't want you to know. But your constant calls were annoying, so I decided to just tell you, Charlotte explained. Are you serious, Charlotte? What's gotten into you? Has all that sun fried your brain? I shot back. How dare you insult me like that? You're taking this too far. You're acting like such a drama queen, she retorted. I'm not being dramatic. I have every right to be upset, especially after years of putting up with your nonsense, I responded. Charlotte shrugged, pretending to be innocent. Oh, Harley dear, sometimes it's better not to know everything your husband does. It was just a little secret getaway, just for us, something special. You wouldn't understand the bond we have. A rush of emotions flooded through me, betrayal, anger, and sadness. It was obvious they had planned this together, leaving me out and feeling completely deceived. As I realized the extent of their deceit, I couldn't help but wonder what else they had lied about. How long had these secret trips been happening? Why were they so insistent on keeping me in the dark, and what else were they hiding from me? The trust I had in Dominic was falling apart, and I snapped out of my thoughts when I heard his voice getting closer. Mom, why did you answer the phone? What's going on? Dominic's voice sounded tense. It's time Holly knew the truth. It's been 4 days, his mother replied firmly. Dominic snatched the phone from his mother, his face going pale as he realized the mess he was in. He stared at the screen, knowing he was caught in a lie. Why did you lie about the business trip, Dominic? And the Wi-Fi was fine the past few days, wasn't it? I demanded. I didn't want you to be mad at me, he admitted. Well, of course I'm mad. I thought you were avoiding me. Is it strange that you want to spend time with your mom? Yeah, a bit. But Dominic, you haven't been standing up for me, and I've been feeling distant from you already. If you wanted mom-son time, you could have just said so. Even if I was upset about not being invited, it would have been better than feeling like this, I argued. Anger surged through me as Dominic tried to explain himself. It was clear he hadn't thought about how his actions would affect me. Dominic, I wouldn't have been upset if you had just been honest with me. It's not about the trip itself. It's about you keeping it a secret. That's what bothers me. I mean, I thought you were cheating on me, for crying out loud. What? No way, Dominic exclaimed. Yeah, well, when I heard women's voices in the background of your calls, I started to wonder, I said bitterly. I have a special bond with my mom. Sometimes we just need to get away, Dominic tried to explain. In Tampa of all places, you both hate Tampa. And what about Gertrude? Weren't we supposed to visit her? I questioned. So this secret was just between you two? What about your dad? Did he know? I pressed. I can't talk right now. I hope this trip was worth it, because when you come back, I'm not sure you'll still have a wife, I said firmly. Holly, please wait, Dominic pleaded. But I couldn't wait. I ended the call and ignored all of Dominic's attempts to reach me. I paced back and forth in my room, trying to make sense of it all. Why would he hide something so simple from me? One thing about me, when you lie about small things, I start to wonder what big things you're hiding. It was strange to think of Dominic spending time with his mom on this secret trip. Honestly, I would have preferred if he was cheating on me. I was frustrated with my distant and secretive husband and his difficult mother. I knew what I had to do. I needed to talk to someone who would understand. I picked up my phone and called my father-in-law, hoping he could offer some clarity and support. Hey, it's Holly. I need to talk to you about something important. I poured my heart out, sharing every detail of the deception that had tainted my marriage. Anger, sadness, and betrayal swirled inside me as I recounted Dominic's lies. From his fake business trip to his desperate attempts to keep me in the dark. His betrayal cut deep. But what hurt even more was Charlotte's involvement. I described how she seemed to enjoy keeping me ignorant, relishing the power she had over me. The weight of their deceit felt suffocating, and as I spoke, I could sense Caleb's shock and hurt in his responses. Caleb's voice turned serious, matching the gravity of my words. What? I had no idea about any of this. I'm so sorry you had to find out like this. As soon as I found out, I called you. Charlotte told me she was going to Tampa to visit her mother and repair their relationship. I believed her. Well, Dominic just confessed that they weren't planning to visit Gertrude at all. And Gertrude has no clue about any visit, I revealed. Caleb's shock and hurt were evident over the phone. It was becoming apparent that Charlotte had been weaving a web of lies, manipulating everyone involved. I can't believe Charlotte would do something like this. It's one thing to have disagreements, but to deceive her own family. It's unforgivable, Caleb said, his voice heavy with disappointment. They both need to learn a lesson, I agreed. That's a brilliant idea. I was seething with anger, ready to do anything to teach Dominic and Charlotte a lesson. After our call ended with words of encouragement and excitement for what was to come, I waited eagerly to hear back from Caleb about his mother-in-law's reaction. A couple of hours passed and Caleb delivered the good news. As Caleb described his conversation with Gertrude, the seriousness of the situation became even clearer. His voice shook with a mixture of anger and sadness. I told her everything, Harley. She was furious, devastated even. She couldn't believe her own daughter would deceive everyone like this, Caleb explained. She deserves to know the truth, Caleb. Charlotte has been treating us horribly for too long, I replied. Gertrude has decided to take action, Harley. She's planning to teach Charlotte a lesson she won't forget. She's fed up with Charlotte's behavior and wants to show her what real rudeness looks like. I hope you don't mind me asking, but what exactly is the issue between Charlotte and Gertrude? Well, Harley, I'm sure you'll find it ironic, but Charlotte always claimed her mother was very rude and cruel to her. They've had a rocky relationship since Charlotte ran away at 16, being in and out of touch for years. It's very toxic, but after talking to Gertrude for the past hour, I'm starting to think Charlotte was the problem all along. It's crazy. I've been married to Shaw for all these years, and you and Dom have only been married for 3. Yet you've managed to uncover more family secrets in this short time. I should have been more curious. I should have stood up more. How could you have known, Caleb? Don't be hard on yourself, please. You were just being a good husband, trusting what your wife told you. And you stood up more than your son. That means something. Thanks, Harley, for everything. I'm glad I could help, even though it's unfortunate it came to this, I remarked. Yeah, I guess so, but I'm looking forward to Gertrude showing them how tough she can be, Caleb responded. The next day arrived, and the fallout from our revelations began. Dominic, unable to grasp the seriousness of the situation, called me in frustration, his words filled with irritation. Holly, what did you do? What do you mean? Don't play dumb with me. Gertrude is here, and nobody else knows we're in town except you. She said she came because she heard we were here. I'm glad she knows the truth. Everyone deserves to know, after all you're sneaking around. How could you do this, Harley? Dominic's voice was filled with frustration. In the background, I heard some commotion, likely from 2 female voices. One sounded much older, which I assumed was Gertrude unleashing her anger. Dominic, maybe it's time Charlotte faces the consequences of her actions. She needs to understand what it feels like to be deceived, I replied firmly. Suddenly, I heard Charlotte's voice. You ungrateful little rat. How dare you expose us like this? As I listened, I couldn't help but chuckle softly, though there was bitterness in my laughter. Before I could respond, I heard another voice, stern and authoritative. Don't you dare speak to that young lady like that. I've had enough of your insolence. You've been telling everyone how rude and nasty I was to you, huh? When all I did was care for you and help you out of trouble. You were such a problem child, lying about everything and being nasty to everyone. And I see that lifestyle has followed you into adulthood. We haven't seen or talked to each other since you left, and this is how you want to act. Do you think I'm rude and nasty? Just wait, I'll show you rude and nasty. I heard things breaking like a glass or a vase, and it made me a bit fearful as the shouting continued. I couldn't imagine how scared Dominic must have been, but I realized that this was the consequence of his actions. He was an adult, responsible for his choices. I was done making excuses for them. They were getting what they deserved, and I was glad to hear it unfold. For the next few days, Dominic kept asking for my forgiveness because his grandmother was driving him crazy. Each time he called, I reminded him that this was his fault. Meanwhile, Charlotte and Gertrude continued arguing back and forth. I was surprised they didn't get kicked out of the hotel they were staying in. As their 7-day trip came to an end, Dominic revealed something even more shocking. Holly, please, you need to talk to Gertrude. I tried talking to Dad, but he's still upset with my mom and me, Dominic pleaded. Slow down, what's going on? You two were supposed to be coming back, right? I asked, trying to keep up. I thought you learned your lesson, I added. Well, Gertrude doesn't think so. She's planning to board the plane with us, Dominic explained. What? She wants to follow us home and make sure my mom starts acting like a respectable adult and not some crazed teenager, he continued. Wow, that's unexpected. Maybe next time you'll stand up for what's right and not go along with your mother's schemes. See you when you get here, I replied. Harley, I regret everything. Haven't you punished us enough? Please talk to Gertrude and tell her she doesn't have to come with us. Dominic pleaded desperately. I don't think so, sweetie. Who am I to argue with that woman? She's terrifying. I responded to Dominic's plea. How do you think we feel? He asked. Honestly, Dom, I don't care how you feel. You've been lying to me for God knows how long, and you never stood up for me when your mom treated me poorly. You're getting your karma. Don't be mad at me now. Have a safe flight. Well, as safe a flight as you came with these two ladies being together, I retorted firmly. As I hung up the phone, a sense of satisfaction washed over me. Finally, the tables had turned and I had stood up against the toxicity that had plagued our lives for too long. Gertrude, the unexpected ally, had unleashed her own brand of justice, and I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of excitement. Now I await their return, expecting stories from Gertrude, as I'm sure she continued to make their lives difficult on that flight. Revenge never tasted so sweet.